We have a lot of material to cover today. And what we're actually going to start with is we're going to do a short version of a particular energetic practice. And this energetic practice is to get us into an internal state of able to go through the internal layers of our own subtle bodies. There's variants on this practice from multiple traditions. And this particular practice, I learned the core of it from the French medical doctor Samuel Sagan during the year that I lived at the Clairvision School in Sydney, Australia. And Dr. Sagan has a great book called Awakening the Third Eye. And the book has very different content than what some similar books with a similar title have within them. Dr. Sagan basically had trained in the Himalayas for many years. He was a translator of Sanskrit texts into French, and mostly had trained with teachers of the Babaji lineage, and at one point was working with Babaji in the Himalayas. So with this particular practice, there is a Kriya Yoga aspect to it. In the way that I'm going to teach it, it has a slightly different context, but the essence of it is something that, regardless of one's tradition, it's a purely natural process for focusing one's attention inward and going through the internal layers of the energetic body. It's a kind of thing you could actually figure out for yourself just by turning the attention inward. And let me connect our doing this practice to the concept that we talked about at the very beginning of the day yesterday, where we talked about the thoughts in the mind of God, and we showed this image of the first form of creation being the circle or the sphere, and that within that creation of the boundary of the circle or sphere, with the center inside of it, there are two movements. One is from center out to the periphery, and the other is from the periphery into center. And so both of these energetic movements occur in multiple ways in creation, one of which is the way that we use our attention. So the people that we characterize as being extroverts normally direct their attention from center outwards. If you're classified more as an introvert, you tend to move your attention more from the periphery inwards, and you're more internally focused. All of us are a combination of both, and we can at will move our attention either direction. But there are times that we are more externally focused and times that we are more internally focused. So for this particular practice, it's a matter of turning the attention inward and becoming aware of what's held internally. Now, the challenge of this in our current culture is that the majority of people in modern Western culture have been brought up in such a way that what we esteem in our culture is primarily intellectual abilities. And so this type of practice is the exact complementary opposite of intellectual thinking. It's a type of direct conscious awareness that does not have anything to do with thinking in a mental, intellectual fashion. It's just pure awareness moving in a particular direction. It's closer to what we think of in terms of Zen or Vipassana or these type of emptiness meditations where there's pure consciousness, not intellectual word thinking in the mind. So the basic functioning here has to do with the ability to move our attention into a center. And this is a practice that I call zero-point centering. And zero-point centering is something very straightforward. Whenever you become aware of an energetic center, and we're going to do it today by becoming aware of a center within our body of energy, but it could be of any energetic center or of anything. Some groups will call this tuning in. If you're working with an external person in front of you or with an object, something of that kind, you tune in to its energy quality, its vibration, its frequency, however you want to think of it. But part of it is that you can actually move your awareness and attention into the center of the energy that you are examining, to get in touch with it, and to some degree to go into resonance with it. And we'll talk about resonance in more detail later today. For our immediate purposes, this zero-point centering is something we can do in our own attention and our own body of energy. So that if I put my energetic awareness at some prominent energetic center in my body, later on today we're going to talk about these primary centers. For instance, for the astral body, there are three primary centers: the center of the head, the center of the heart, and the center of what in Japan is called the hara, or the will center in the belly. And one of these that is for many people in the West easiest to feel is the one in the head, because we focus so much attention on the head in our culture. And so if we become aware of the energy center that we tend to call the third eye in modern Western metaphysics, and has different names in different cultures, if we simply become still and quiet inside, get out of the monkey mind chatter, and put the attention at that place between the eyebrows, and give that a moment of attention, we can become aware of a particular sensation at that location. And what it normally feels like to begin with, when you hit the first layer of it, it will feel like something like vibration, or pressure, or density. And this 0 point centering is that simply when you feel this energy at this location, and again, it could be anywhere in your body or even outside of the body, when you become aware of the sensation, you then move all of your attention and awareness into the very center of what you feel. And by moving your attention into its center, it opens up. And in opening up, you can go deeper and deeper into the core of it and experience its essential nature. This is called, in the Himalayan tradition, tasting the nectar, to taste the nectar of these internal centers. And in the work that I do, I call these grail points, because a grail holds a divine essence. And every one of these energetic centers in our body of energy holds a particular divine energy and a particular quality that is like a nectar that we can get into touch with. So that for this particular practice, the first part of it is 0 point centering. You get quiet and still, you put the attention at a particular energetic center, which for us here is going to be at the third eye center, and then you move your attention and awareness into the very center of what you feel. Okay, you can open your eyes, those of you that have them closed. I want to lay out a little more foundation of it before we do the practice. This 0 point centering is a core practice energetically to get into touch with the essence of anything you're working with inside you or externally. The next part of this is that there is a way that we can amplify the subtle vibration of any energy center in our body, and in time that subtle vibration could also be added to any energy center outside of us. So for instance, in Qigong healing, we can actually work with other types of vibration and give it to a person's energy center to increase the vibration of that center that needs help. So that one of the aspects of this is that in many traditions you will find that they will tie in the breathing process to amplifying the vibration. That breathing is a master part of our energy system to bring in universal energy and to release the spent energy back out to nature. So that one of the practices that you will find in multiple traditions, and particularly in the Himalayas, is to create particular types of vibration at the throat. And this subtle vibration at the throat creates an excess energy that can then be donated to, in this case for us, an energy center in our own bodies to make it more tangible. Because to begin with, some of these energy centers might be a little amorphous to you. Like, I think I feel something, I'm not quite sure. So you want to amplify the vibration there, you want to intensify it. And so this method of creating vibration can help to amplify it, and it can be added really to anything you do energetically. There are variants on this, so that for example in fields like quantum touch, when they work energetically with people, they will teach you when you begin those practices to tie it into the breath, so that you are constantly bringing in energy through the breath and cycling it through. It's the same thing in many Qigong practices. So that with the energy constantly coming in through the breath, you're constantly fueling and feeding your own energy field to be able to work with the energy field of another person. Because otherwise, your energy field will quickly become depleted. The optimal thing at all times anyway is to simply be an intermediary, a conduit between the universal energy and the target, and not to bring it out of yourself. But with ourselves as the intermediary, if we do start taking the energy out of our own energy field, we'll quickly become depleted. So many methods rely on this type of breathing to keep our energy field charged and to keep the energy moving through. For the particular method that we are going to use, it's related to the way that the human energy body has a vast array of specialized functions. The function of my head center is very different from the function of my heart center. And if I do 0 point centering into the center of my head, the nectar that I get in touch with, the energetic quality, is very different than the energy quality that I will get in touch with if I do 0-point centering into my heart center or into the will center. So with these specialized functions in the energy body, this is true for the physical body as well. So with any basic knowledge of anatomy, you know that all the parts of the human physical body have specialized functions. What the liver does is different than the heart and different from the spleen. So within the human energy body and physical body, there's a particular center that has the specific purpose of creating external vibration, and that is the throat center, especially the larynx. The throat center, the larynx, if you just think about it, it's fairly obvious, is the part of our energy anatomy that is specialized to create a vibration that is sent out externally. So I'm speaking to you now by creating a vibration that I'm sending out toward you, that you're picking up the vibration of the sound. And so this has to do with the Kabbalistic power of the word. That the word, and let's remember too that in the esoteric Christian tradition, this idea of the logos as the word is a crystallized form of vibration. And so the larynx, through this geometric shaping that Elizabeth talked about yesterday when she introduced eurythmy, the larynx with its movements and with the movement of my tongue and the mouth, I create geometries that then move that vibration into specific shapes that have specific powers. For our purpose here, we're just going to do something very simple, and that is to create a very subtle vibration at the throat that we can use to amplify our awareness here at the third eye center. Now you'll see in a number of traditions that they will talk about this power of the larynx, and they will compare it in many cases to the buzzing of a bee. In fact, if you go to ancient Egypt and you study the hieroglyphs and you study the way that they represent functions, you'll notice that they use the form of the bee in many cases, because the bee has specific functions in nature. One thing that the bee does is that it creates this very strong vibration. That's why you hear the buzzing of the bee. And if we create that type of buzzing sound at the throat, you'll quickly become aware of the type of energy, the power that it has. How is it that the bees can alchemically transmute things like the pollen it picks up into honey or into royal jelly? It comes through a vibratory process that's related to the vibration of the bee. So what I'd like you to do now, as an introduction to the practice, is just to close your eyes for a moment and take the index finger and middle finger of the right hand and put it at the base of the throat. And for what we're about to do, just have all of your attention and awareness at the feeling of vibration at your fingertips there at the base of the throat. Now what I want you to do is to make a strong buzzing or humming sound with the throat, and just tune into the feeling of energy at the throat when you do so. Try it one more time. Okay, you can open your eyes. So you should be able to feel that very tangibly with the fingertips, but also you can feel it throughout your entire energy body. In fact, if you do it for a few minutes, your body will start to get very warm. So the practice we're about to do now is one that you find in a number of yogic traditions, where by creating this vibration at the throat, we can amplify the energy in our own field and donate that energy to any center we're working with. However, it's not always practical out in the world to be making this type of vibration sound. If I'm riding on a bus or I'm on a plane or I'm out in public somewhere, to be going is a little too obvious and gets me attention that I don't like because I'm an introvert. I don't want anybody looking at me. So one method that you can use to work with this is something that is called the throat friction or the friction breathing. Now this is based on having a slight constriction at the base of the throat, where you slightly pull in the muscles of the base of the throat. And then you have a strong breathing going in and out. And as the breath moves through the center with that slight constriction, it creates a vibration. We're going to do it to begin with in a way that is very strong and audible so that you can hear it. And when we did this at the Clairvision School, they would jokingly call it Darth Vader breathing, because that's what it sounds like. So it's something like, so I want you to give that a try, and I want you to do it with your mouth open and making a strong audible sound. Now this is not a buzzing and it is not a humming, and you're not making a vocal sound. It's only the sound of the air going in and out of the throat with a slight constriction here. And I want you to feel that this creates a vibration at the throat when you do it. That's like the buzzing, only it's more subtle. But also it's something you can do without other people picking up on. So to begin with, the mouth is open, strong, audible, but not vocal breathing, and feeling the vibration here at the base of the throat. When you do it. Most of you have your mouth closed. Your mouth is open, strong, audible breathing through the mouth. Later on, you'll be able to close your mouth. For right now, just so you get the hang of it, mouth is open, strong, audible breathing. You can always tell the introverts when we do this practice because they always want to close their mouth. If your mouth is still closed, I'm talking to you. Okay, now you can close your mouth, and now just do it through the nose. You still have that slight constriction at the base of the throat. Only now you're breathing in and out of the nose. And then see if you can make it more subtle still to where there is no audible sound, but you still have a subtle vibration at the throat that you can pick up on. Okay, and you can relax for a moment. This is the friction breathing. We're going to tie this into the practice that we're about to do, because not only is it a helpful technique to know in general, and we'll talk more about it later in the week, but also it can help make particular practices go a lot faster and be more effective in a short period of time. So that when we do this practice of becoming aware at the front of the third eye center, and we're using the third eye because it's one of the most easy centers for Westerners to become aware of to begin with. And as you're going to go through the different layers of it, by adding this vibration from the throat to it, you're going to be simultaneously aware at a certain stage that I will tell you in the practice of the vibration at the throat and the vibration at the eye. And by tying those two together, this will become much more tangible to you. And the development of this center can happen much more quickly. Because we're only going to do a short practice of this today, because we have a lot of other things to cover. So the actual practice is going to be that we put the awareness and attention at the third eye center. Again, it could be any center, but for us it's going to be the third eye to begin with. And then with our awareness there, we're going to move our attention and awareness into the very center of whatever we feel to begin with. And once we become aware of that energy and we're moving into the center of it, we're then going to tie the throat friction into it to make it more tangible and to make the vibration at the eye stronger. And then we're just going to keep moving into the center of it. And for this practice, I want you to stay with your authentic experience. In other words, this is not a visualization exercise. You're not pretending anything. This is a pure Vipassana Zen type of meditation in which you're just observing what is there. You don't create anything. But by putting your awareness here, you'll become aware of a vibration or a pressure to begin with. And as you keep moving into it, with your intention going into the center, adding more vibration to it, it can open up to the next layer. If the next layer doesn't open up to you, don't worry about it, stay with the layer you're on. But the next layer that can open up is one of light or color. And then we're going to keep going into it, and there's another layer that may open up to you. And that is a layer that is like a dark purple background. It's like an ultraviolet light. And I'm not going to go into all the details about what stands behind this right now. We'll talk about that at a later time. But just for the practice itself, know that you can move through the layers, and you're actually moving through the layers of your subtle body when you do it. So that when you're at this first layer of the vibration and pressure, you're actually at the layer of the etheric body, the life body, the chi, ki, prana. And as you move to the other layers and become aware of deeper phenomena, it's actually moving into deeper layers of your own energy body. That's the secret of moving into the center with your awareness. That's the secret of 0-point centering. When you first do it, you come to a superficial layer. Then you drop to the next layer and the next layer. So for this practice, what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're wearing glasses, please remove them. And to please sit up straight in your chair, not with a strict military posture, but with the back straight and with the back of the head aligned with it. Because if the back of the head is aligned with the spine, you always get a better result in any energy practice. And so, to make sure you have this, what we tend to do in the West is we tend to sit like this, and we jut the chin out. So you might just want to try pulling your chin in a little bit, and see if you get to a place of pulling the chin in, that it's comfortable, but you feel a kind of an energetic click, like, okay, now the back of my head is better aligned with my spine. So just try that, pulling the chin in a little bit. And to begin with, I'm just going to ask you to take a few deep breaths and relax. And we want to get out of the monkey mind chatter and just go into pure awareness at the third eye. So go ahead and with purely relaxed awareness, put your attention at the place between the eyebrows, just slightly inside the head, maybe just about a half an inch, just slightly inside the head, between the eyebrows. Just put your attention there. And by relaxing, being aware of that center, you might become aware of a sensation. It might feel like vibration or tingling. For some of you, it will feel like a pressure or as a place of extra density in your energy body. Vibration, pressure, density, any sensation that you actually have at that space between the eyebrows, just put your awareness there for a moment. Stay relaxed. Keep moving the awareness deeper into the center of whatever you feel between the eyebrows. And now, with your awareness there between the eyebrows to that first layer, start doing the friction breathing. Slight constriction at the base of the throat. And at this stage, you might actually want to do it with the mouth open, to create a strong vibration at the base of the throat, to build up the vibration at the base of the throat. So awareness at the third eye center and awareness at the base of the throat as the vibration builds up as you continue to practice the friction breathing. And as you continue to do this, become simultaneously aware of the vibration at the throat and the vibration at the third eye. So with the awareness at the third eye and of the vibration at the throat, let those two link together, be energetically linked so that the vibration at the throat is directly going to and feeding the vibration or whatever you feel at the third eye center. So in other words, you feel the third eye being supported and energetically increased by the vibration from the throat. Continue the practice. You can close your mouth and just breathe through the nose. Strong, steady friction breathing now through the nose, but still feeling the vibration at the throat, supporting and increasing the vibration at the third eye center. Continue the friction breathing in the background. Return all of the awareness to the third eye center, knowing it is still being supported by the friction breathing. And again, move all of your attention and awareness into the very center of whatever you feel at the third eye center. Relaxed awareness, moving your attention into the very center of what you feel at the third eye, letting that open up. Stay with your authentic experience at the third eye. Don't try to create anything. Just feel it. And for some of you, the feeling of vibration at the third eye may start to open up, to become aware of light or color at the third eye. If that doesn't happen for you, just stay with the vibration. If it does open up, let yourself drop to this next layer and move into the very center of whatever you experience at the third eye. Just observe whatever emerges at the third eye. No need to react to it, no need to analyze it, just observe it. No need to try to have any experience. Just stay with what you authentically perceive and feel at the third eye. Keep moving your awareness into the very center of the third eye. Constant dynamic movement into the center. Keep relaxing deeper into the center of the third eye. Friction breathing in the background to support it. And as you continue to move deeper into the center of the third eye, stay with your authentic experience. But for some of you, past the light and color, another layer might open up. And that would be a layer that looks like a dark purple light as a complete overlay. If that appears for you, just relax. Go deeper into that layer. If it doesn't, stay with whatever layer you're actually feeling or perceiving. If anything appears to you in the third eye space, no need to analyze or react, just keep relaxing and observing. And you can let go of the friction breathing, just keep breathing normally, eyes closed, and just keep relaxing more deeply into the center of what you perceive at the third eye. Constant dynamic movement of awareness into the center of the center of the center of the third eye. And keeping the eyes closed, you can let go of the awareness at the third eye and simply become aware of your general body of energy. And keeping the eyes closed, ask yourself the silent question, how has this practice structured my body of energy? And just tune into the feeling of your general body of energy. And keeping the eyes closed, one last thing. Move your attention and awareness straight up above the top of your head. So straight up above the crown of the head. And moving that attention and awareness straight up in a vertical line above the top of the head, see if you can come to a place energetically above the top of the head that you can feel another energy center. It might feel like a place above the head of increased vibration, or a place of light, or for some people it will feel like a platform of energy that you can rest your awareness at. But simply moving your awareness with your eyes closed straight up above the top of the head, looking for another energy center or platform above the top of the head. And if you can perceive another center above the top of the head, just spend a moment moving your energy and awareness into the center of whatever you feel at that center above the head. Into the center of the energy or platform above the head. And just see what that feels like. And then relax, keep your eyes closed, let go of the meditation, and getting ready to bring your attention back to the room, but keeping the eyes closed. Just become aware of the feeling of your body sitting in the seat. Become aware of the feeling of your feet on the floor. And just taking a few deep breaths, coming back into the body a bit. And keeping the eyes closed, please rub the hands together until you get the palms very warm. And when the palms become very warm, then cup the warm palms over your closed eyes with no direct pressure against the eye itself, but simply having the warm palms above the closed eyes to let the warmth of the palms sink into the physical eyes. And also at this moment, a last moment of awareness at the third eye, if anything appears to you there. But letting the warmth of the palms sink into and warm the physical eyes. And when you're ready, you can snap the fingers of either hand and open your eyes. Now, before you move around too much, spend just a moment tuning into the energy of the space. Just like we asked before, how did this practice structure my body of energy? You can ask the question, how did this practice with everyone doing it at once structure the energy of the space? Because the energy of the space is different than it was when you began. Okay, any questions or comments on the practice?
That was fantastic, thank you.
Great, thank you.
One imagination or gift that I was given was a very simple one, and that was the sense of that if we were spiders, that we would know how to create our web form, and it was as though whatever we're doing for these practices have like a very physical, tangible quality that requires that level of body participation.
Interesting, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
I've been doing this for a while. Long Clairvision, and I'm noticing the way energy transmissions or activations in other chakras throughout my body.
Yes, exactly. That's very common and will normally happen in the course of practice the more you do it. For some people it will happen the very first time they do it. All of the different energy centers of the body are interconnected through the grid, through the net of energy in the body. And so as you begin to work in energetically intensifying particular centers, sometimes that energy will begin to become distributed. And particular imbalances in the balance of different energy centers will begin to work itself out. Certain channels that weren't as fully open will become more fully open, and various distributions will take place. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that you're actually structuring your subtle body through the practice. And you can get sensations as those structures become solidified and become stable. The first few times that you do virtually any type of meditation, a lot of your awareness is going through, am I doing it right? What am I supposed to do now? What's supposed to be happening? And so there's a certain amount that we're still caught in the monkey mind rather than actually totally involved in the practice. Then after we get used to it and we can do it without having to think mentally about it, it begins to open up to the sensation more. And then it begins to stabilize as a structure in the energy body. And that's why we have that moment at the end where we ask ourselves to tune in and ask ourselves, how has this practice structured my body of energy? Because every practice that we do structures our body of energy. Even what I do lying on the couch at home watching TV structures my body of energy. Might not be a way that I want to structure it, but it's still structuring it. Everything we do with our attention and awareness, particularly with things that are very quiet, focused, internal awareness, very strongly create these structures. So it's very good to tune into this. And if you feel those energies being redistributed, it's very important to relax and let that redistribution take place. But also, because many of us today follow practices from multiple traditions. Most of us don't necessarily follow just one teacher, the way it happened almost all the time in the ancient world. We need to be clear about what different practices from different traditions are structuring in the body of energy. Because we're all different, and we're all trying to achieve things that are similar in some ways, but different in others. You can tune into the body of energy of every person in this room, and every person in this room has slightly different structures of energy. And that's why they're very good at particular things and not so good at other things. They've structured their energy to be good at the things they're good at. So for most of us, we have at least some idea of what it is that we're wanting to achieve in our lifetime, what we want to do, who we want to be at a higher level. And we need, because we have very limited time and energy, to find a way to focus on those things that are going to structure our body of energy to let those things happen as quickly and efficiently as possible. Because we could spend all day doing practices that aren't going to create structures that are going to move us toward that goal, that are actually made to create something else. So it's very important to understand the structure of this. And so one of the things that we get in sacred geometry, tying it back into this course, is what this course is actually, is learning the vocabulary of shape and form. So I haven't been saying, well, you do this and then you create a dodecahedral structure around the rib cage and this will then create an icosahedral movement through the lower pelvis, blah, 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 because we don't even have a vocabulary yet. So if we can't even talk about amongst ourselves, how are higher spiritual forces going to talk to us about structuring the body of energy with forms? We have to have the language first. So one of the goals of this week-long training is to give us the vocabulary of the shapes and the forms, and to get some idea of their functions, so that we can start getting a basic understanding of how these things work. But coming back to this practice itself, another aspect of this practice was the aspect of moving through the layers of the subtle body. It's a very important aspect of this work, because just by becoming quiet and still inside, you can start finding that, okay, at the first level, with the vibration, density, pressure, instead of being completely exvoluted where I have no self-awareness, I then come to the level that I have some self-awareness, and I'm basically feeling the etheric vibratory body, vibration, density, pressure. But if I keep relaxing, I'll go into the next deeper layer, which is the astral body, which will appear as color, light, might appear as pinpoints of color, or as clouds of color or light. And then if I keep moving into it, at the next layer, I then have this opening up to what appears to be this overlay. And it's important that people understand that this overlay that we're talking about, this dark purple light, is not like a purple color that you see at the astral body level. That purple color or any other color that you see is more like clouds or points of color. This is an actual dark purple overlay over everything that is perceived at the third eye center at this level. And this is something that's spoken of very specifically in the Himalayan tradition. You need to get to the place where you can stabilize this dark purple light. It's actually a background to the spiritual plane. It's the background to the astral plane. And it's actually going to tie into some things we talk about a little later in the course. And for those of you that did the biogeometry training, it's connected to the higher harmonic of ultraviolet. So there's a reason why the Egyptians call that the spiritual light and the atmosphere of the angels. By stabilizing that perception of that level with what appears to be a dark purple light. You know, if you go to Spencer's or some type of novelty store at the mall and you see an ultraviolet light, how does that ultraviolet light appear to you? It looks like a dark purple light. And that's what we have here. That becomes the screen on which we can perceive spiritual activities. And part of the things that people very commonly will perceive is pure geometries, because that's part of that layer. Then further things can happen past that, some of which we'll reference later in the course. One other thing about the practice we just did, and that is that working at the third eye center, it starts here, but it's actually a tunnel that runs from the front to the back of the head. And there are multiple centers along the third eye tunnel from the front to the back. And that tunnel actually intersects other axes of energy that we're going to talk about later. There's a function for the third eye at its various stations along the tunnel, and there are functions for the heart. In fact, you can work with groups that almost never work with the head, they only work with the heart, and that's their entire focus. Certain groups in India, certain groups in the Middle East with the Sufis, they focus entirely on developing centers in the heart center. Or in the East, a lot of groups really focus on the Dantian, the lower energy center around the Hara, because that's a very strong energy center for energetic work. And in fact, you have to be grounded here to do a lot of advanced work with Qigong and energy work. But they're all specialized, all these centers. For some of what we're doing in this course, we are having a compressed overview of various aspects of sacred geometry, which is a vast topic. It's the blueprint of everything. It's a gigantic topic, and it's a very daunting thing for me to try to pull together for you in a week pieces of the puzzle so you have some foundation. But to be able to pick up this aspect of sacred geometry, when we're going through all these pieces, I'm unpacking the pieces for you, but the pieces are originally part of a packed thought form. Everything that I'm describing over the week is part of a single thought form, and I'm unpacking one piece at a time. The place to get to in the energy centers to perceive packed thought forms is actually not here or here or here. This can perceive the planes and things of that kind. This has a function. But the place to actually start perceiving packed thought forms is that center above the head. That's why we were talking about the center above the head as the final thing, to become aware of that. Because it's from here that you can really perceive the archetypes, perceive the packed thought forms, and pull all this information into a central space. Sometimes people say, well, how can you go hour after hour and reel this stuff off? And I used to do it more so. Those of you that trained with me a couple of years ago will know that I used to do this for like 6 hours straight. But people would always say, I can't absorb it. So now we break it down into smaller pieces. But the aspect of that, what makes it possible, is working from this center. It's all a packed thought form, and I'm just unpacking it for you one piece at a time. But if you want to really perceive the packed aspect, it's coming from here. Because one thing that you'll notice sometimes is that when we're going into the material and we're going very quickly, here's this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece, it requires a certain mental charge to do that. And you start getting tired and you start fuzzing out. I can't take anymore. But people have different thresholds. At the end of the day, one person's going, and another person's like this. And so, so I got to find a happy medium. But the basic thing is that there's a certain amount of voltage that's used up in this kind of thinking process, but it's much more efficient from here. We'll talk about this tomorrow with tomorrow morning's practice. But essentially, this ability to perceive packed thought forms from the place above the head, this is a place of very high voltage of energy. And when the attention is here, then you can work with what Dr. Sagan of the Clairvision School would call super fast mental processing and pick up a lot of information in a short period of time. So the more you can stabilize the center, the more you can work with it. And again, tomorrow morning we'll work more on the center and how to make sure that its voltage does not come down to start burning out the physical body. Otherwise you'll start getting this fatigue syndrome. This is an energy center that's meant to be above the head and to stay above the head, so our attention is working from here. Okay, that's one piece of the puzzle. And what we'll do now is we'll go into... You bet. Thank you very much.
I have one question.
Yes.
In our meditations, would it be good to realize that center and try to stabilize that in daily meditation?
It would, and we're going to be dealing with that later in the week. This practice is a foundation because it's easier to begin to stabilize centers in the physical body. And then we'll be working more with moving to the center above and stabilizing the central axis and platforms in the axis. So we are going to get there. But it's very, very helpful to work at the center above the head. And you'll find that multiple traditions around the world do work with that center because it has multiple functions. And I think it's, and Elizabeth, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it's in my book on the Western spiritual tradition that there's an article there about 12 different perspectives on the center above the head because it has a variety of different activities and functions. And so if you have that book or you want to take a look at the book in there, it's got a little article that talks about all the different functions of the center and some of the ways that it's addressed in different traditions. And there's one more.
Sometimes I have so much pressure on my head. Does it mean I'm not downloading the packages, or is it why would I have so much pressure?
We're going to be getting into that as part of our work tomorrow, but one of the things that we found at the Clairvision School, it can be multiple things. So I'm not saying it's definitely this, but one thing that we've definitely found is that this center above the head is the place that we have super fast mental processing, access packed thought forms, and a lot of spiritual activity. The voltage of it, because this is such intense activity, is too high for the physical body. So it's not meant to happen here. But very spiritual people are trying to access this, and we subconsciously think of myself not as being there, I think of myself as being here. This is like the center of me. So I subconsciously want to pull that energy and content down to here. That leads to an overcharge and a burning out of the naughty subtle energy channels. And so it's really a matter of learning how to activate the function from here and not trying to subconsciously pull it down to activate it from here. There's actually a channel that goes from this center down through the central column to unpack into the firing of neurons in the brain for brain thinking. But that's at a much lower voltage than what we can do with packed thought forms here.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, last one.
In the meditation on the third asana, I felt that awareness of a tunnel here, and I don't know exactly how to frame this question, but it felt like energy was moving forwards through that tunnel, and I was wondering how to stay centered or balanced so that, again, it's hard to ask this question, because I was aware of the color in front of me, but not behind me.
Yes, I got it. It's a very important question, and a deeper aspect of this, which we'll be getting into later in the week to some extent, but I know you're just here for today, so let me cover some of it right now, is that when we work with these energy centers, there is a particular configuration of them. So one of the simplest illustrations I can give is of the central vertical axis of energy that I just talked about. We want to activate the center up here, and that has certain functions. Well, actually, when we get to working with it and activating it, we can become unbalanced in the energy field if I don't simultaneously activate the one down here. And the two then connect in the Vesica form, and they need to be balanced in that format. Same thing if I do a lot of work at the third eye. If you examine the energy body of somebody that's worked in a tradition where they do a lot of third eye work, but they don't do a lot of Taoist yoga type work, they don't do work with Qigong at the hara, their energy field then gets imbalanced toward the head center, because this needs to be balanced with this. So there's always this balancing that's going on as we move through the centers. So if you go up, you need to go down. If you go forward, you need to go back. And so that's what's happening there. That activation of the front of the channel has to do with particular developments. I'll just mention a couple of them. One is the whole idea that, again, this is a third eye tunnel, and we become aware to begin with, usually for most people, at the front of the tunnel, and then we start moving back toward the central part, which is the most powerful part, and then toward the ancient palace of the back of the head, a very primeval form of consciousness. But of course it extends further toward the back and further to the front. So it's actually an axis of energy, like if you think of a pole going through the head, literally it's going all the way through. But I'm most conscious of where it's in the body. But it also goes forward, and the part of it going forward is related to what you see in the Egyptian depictions of the serpent or the uraeus coming out of the person's third eye center. It's actually an energy form that begins to come out to perceive things in the front of the field and to perceive things spiritually. So for these types of activities and activations, in most cases it's beneficial to let that continue to work. The fact that it activated quickly in you means that it's already something inherent in your field. And that's a very important thing. People have different experiences doing these practices because they have different inherent structuring of the field already. One person wouldn't feel what you just felt for 3 years. You got it immediately because it's already inherent and it's just getting activated. So they might experience something else. So it's good to let that develop. But again, it's also good that whenever you start going in one direction, go in the other direction. So at the same time as you're letting that develop, also start working on the conscious awareness of moving straight back in the third eye tunnel, particularly to the center of the head, and it'll be more stable. And again, I highly recommend the book by Samuel Sagan on awakening the third eye, because he doesn't talk about all of this. He doesn't talk about the center above the head or below the body. But what he does talk about is a lot about the third eye tunnel, and he does talk about balancing these three centers. And it's very helpful stuff. You bet. So, where we left off yesterday, we were going through an overview of the Masters of the Net tradition. And we had looked at this initiation into sacred geometry and its different aspects and activities in the Egyptian and the Greek and the Hebrew Kabbalistic, New Testament, Holy Grail, Islamic. And as we've done this actually as a timeline. Started at the earliest, moved up to current times. And the Rosicrucian work really begins in public in the late 1500s, and the early 1600s is the time that you begin to see public documents coming out in Germany. So one of the hallmarks of a lot of these early Rosicrucian documents is that they really don't give you a whole lot of information in the text. There's allusions to certain things, but this is the time that you have all these alchemical texts and they use all this veiled language. The initiate gets it, nobody else does, that sort of thing. But one way to communicate the information in a straightforward form was that they also would often contain geometric diagrams. Because by meditation on the geometric diagram, the diagram itself holds as a packed thought form information that would take you several books, several huge books, to actually explain all the stuff in it. But like in either one of these pictures, there's a huge amount of embedded content if you understand what's held there. So for instance, to this one here, on the left side, it goes through these spheres within spheres. Okay? Spheres within spheres with different ranges of activity, with things like the 9 spiritual hierarchies, and then a connection from the center here to the center of the Godhead above in their frame of reference called Jehovah Elohim, and there being a Trinity aspect, and you see the Trinity there, and then other things depicted here having to do with alchemy and with the formless essence of Ein Sof and other things as part of this whole construction diagram. Commonly Even before these things were published, these things were drawn out by a particular teacher and given to his students, and the students would redraw them over time. And by redrawing it, they really got it into their energy body and a meditative focus on, okay, what's happening here in the structure? Because when you understand the structure, again, it's a packed thought form, everything else comes out of it. And same thing for the one on the right-hand side. It shows these interconnections between the different spheres and their activities. So there's a tremendous amount of information in these things. And let me say something about this background of the Rosicrucian tradition. Sometimes it's misunderstood when I tell people that my own spiritual orientation is primarily Rosicrucian, because they think that then I'm a part of AMORC or some group like that. I'm not a member of any Rosicrucian group. It's not strictly the thing of what Woody Allen says, where I don't want to be a member of any group that would have me as a member, but part of it is that the impulse behind the Rosicrucians, it's great if there's a group that you can work with, but it's something spiritual in nature. So you can work with it independently, or you can find some group that works for you. I've never found a group that works for me, so I do it independently. It's all a matter of what you're connected to spiritually. I'm not a big believer in you have to be a part of some external structure that's going to administer it to you. I'm a big believer in direct connection. So when I talk about my connection to Rosicrucianism, it's just that that is a path that works for me, and that's the one that I understand things in the best. And there's certain aspects of Rosicrucianism that I think are helpful, because what Rosicrucianism does is it translates esoteric aspects from many spiritual traditions around the world in many time periods into concepts and frames of reference that fit the cultural context that I've grown up in. For instance, I've done a lot of study of ancient Egypt, but it is hard for us to understand the temple science of ancient Egypt because their references are completely different from ours. When they show me a picture of a scarab, they know that a scarab beetle rolls a sphere that has the eggs of its young in it, and so life is being birthed out of the sphere when they show you a scarab. I don't know that. I've never seen a scarab. Or they show me the form of an ibis with Thoth. They know what an ibis does. When they show me the baboon connected to Thoth, I don't know that a baboon at dawn will make the sound and hail the rising of the sun, but they do because they see it every day. There are cultural references that are part of their understanding. Rosicrucianism puts the essential knowledge into a cultural context that I can understand from my upbringing and my culture. There's another aspect to it too, that as we see here, there are particular time cycles, and things will emerge in different ways at different times. And so there's one very interesting time cycle that's referenced in this particular slide, which is that in ancient Egypt, they really focused on a particular time cycle. And that time cycle had to do with Sirius. And so the complete movement of the Sirius time cycle lasts roughly 1,459 years. And so if you look at old Egyptian texts, they're always talking about Sirius. And they use the term Sothis. And different traditions will look at different things. So if you look at the Hindu tradition, they're looking at the 4 yugas, the Kali Yuga, the Age of Light, etc., etc. As I mentioned the other day, the Mayans looking at orbits of Venus, looking at connections to galactic center, different orbits and different time periods. Because when we look at the orbits of planets, those are also time periods that affect things on our planet. So this Sirius cycle of 1,459 years has a particular manifestation vis-a-vis the Rosicrucians. So what I mean by that is if you look at ancient Egyptian history, there's a very interesting period in ancient Egypt. There's only one period in which there was a female pharaoh, where there was an acknowledged pharaoh who was a woman. They had female leaders at other times, but only one female pharaoh, and that was Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut had a remarkable person also that worked with her, who was said to be her wise counselor and her architect, and his name was Senmut or Senenmut. And if you look into the story of Hatshepsut, you cannot avoid finding out about Senmut. They worked together so closely. From a Rosicrucian perspective, there's actually a whole group of spiritual adepts that incarnated at that time, including Hatshepsut and Senenmut and other people around them. And they built a remarkable temple that you can still go to in Egypt today. That's called Djeser Djeseru, and it means the Holy of Holies. It's a remarkable temple that has a chapel of Anubis on one side, a chapel of Hathor on the other side. It has 3 levels going upward, just like 3 steps moving up to an altar. And what they were doing at that time was laying a particular foundation of esoteric activity. So interestingly enough, the time period that this happened was around 1459 BC. That's when they incarnated and they did this activity and they built Djeser in Egypt. So one Sirius cycle later, 1459 years, we have 0 AD, and we have the entire story of the incarnation of the Solo Logos into the body of Jesus with esoteric Christianity. So one perfect Sirius cycle later. Well, what's going to happen in the next Sirius cycle? 1459 AD. That's the exact time given in the Rosicrucian documents for the initiation of Christian Rosenkreuz, after having connected with certain masters in the Middle East. That's what the documents say. And so there's a particular hidden cycle here that's going on. Something from Egypt is coming into the modern day from this perspective of the Rosicrucians. And so this is some of my frame of reference in doing this work. And again, some of my frame of reference for the work that I do with biogeometry and studying the Egyptian mysteries. There's a connection here. We're not going to get into it so much in this course, but there are particular ways that time cycles are reflected over time. And over time, what we're looking at right now is that the old Egyptian mysteries are being reflected. In some ways, an opposite or inverse reflection, but they're coming back today. And that's one reason why people are fascinated by Egypt today. The information from Egypt is coming out. And if you turn on the Discovery Channel, you have about 20 Egypt documentaries every week. It's what people are fascinated by. So we were talking about this particular hidden time cycles. Things work according to time cycles all the time. And the cosmic clock for the time cycles are these celestial events that we talked about yesterday. So this Sirius cycle aspect is very interesting. You know, why did the Egyptian priests study Sirius so much? Is there something related to the time cycle of it? Also, there's a particular energetic and beings and forces connected to Sirius that are spoken of by many traditions that are of importance. So the Rosicrucian tradition in and of itself, which to be honest has never really had a physical expression on Earth. It's not that sort of thing. There are different groups that are Rosicrucian, and it's great as long as they do good work. But it's a spiritual impulse, and it's again meant to bring a lot of classical information into the present day in a way that the modern Western mind can understand it. And so we really had this emergence of Rosicrucian knowledge in Europe beginning in the 1600s. And this then led to the release of a number of books. Around 1785, there was one called Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians that was very influential. And then in 1875, Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled came out. And one of the original inspirations of Blavatsky and Isis Unveiled was actually Rosicrucian. But over time, there were certain things that took place. This becomes a rather odd esoteric story. I don't think we have time for today, but essentially because of certain occult problems that developed around the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky ended up being assisted by some Indian occultists and then relocated to Adyar, India. And so the whole context of the Theosophical Society became more Indian and more Eastern, but it started out in a different place. It's quite a fascinating and intricate story, what took place as far as intrigue on the occult level around the Theosophical Society. But it was the Theosophical Society that laid the foundation for everything we think of today as free Western metaphysics and the New Age. It all comes out of that. Before that, there wasn't anywhere you could go in the West for the type of free exchange of metaphysical knowledge that you have, that we take for granted in the West today. Next slide. Now, one of the specialties of the Rosicrucian tradition, because different traditions specialize in different things, is that the Rosicrucian tradition has a tremendous focus on being able to participate in these great thought forms, the thought forms in the mind of God, to be able to perceive these packed pieces of information and to understand how things fit together. That's why in some cases the esoteric meaning of some Rosicrucians saying that they are part of the school of Mikael is that one of the functions of the archangel Michael, understood esoterically, is that he is called sometimes the regent of the cosmic intelligence. What that means is that one of the functions of this being is to hold the big picture, how it all fits together. That essentially, what we get in the different spiritual traditions are all fragments of an original unified gnosis. And the Archangel Michael is one of the spiritual beings that holds the keys to how the whole thing fits into a unified context and picture. And so it's through connection with this being and with the impulse that's connected to that, that we can begin to work with the type of information that we're dealing with in this course. We want to be able to see things with the big picture, because from my perspective and from a Rosicrucian perspective, it's not possible to have freedom of choice until you know what your choices are. If you're only given one or two choices, you don't have much freedom of choice. But if you know the whole palette of possibilities, the whole big, beautiful palette of everything that could possibly exist in the world and the patterns and structures behind it, then you have a lot of possibilities. So we need to get the big picture. This is a couple of diagrams coming out of Rosicrucianism. The first one particularly is something that's also was part of the original theosophical inspiration coming out of their original work, which was this idea of time cycles, showing the way that starting with what in the East is sometimes called manvantaras, these are whole times of planetary evolution. This then moves down to different states of development, whether it's at a mineral level or a plant level, etc., then down to what they call conditions of form, whether it's completely formless, or it has the beginnings of a blueprint form, or whether it then moves into the astral level, or then becomes concretized at the physical level. And then down to the different great eras. So there's the Atlantean era that we hear about from the Greeks, the present era, and then the 7 post-Atlantean eras, which is where we are today. And so we have here ancient Indian epoch, Persian, Babylonian, Chaldean, Egyptian, Greco-Roman, the present epoch, then the 6th and the 7th. And there's actually a reflection that takes place here that we're not going to go into great detail on right now, but the 1st and the 7th are connected, 2nd and the 6th, 3rd and the 5th, and the 4th stands alone. So the 3rd epoch, which was the Egyptian epoch, and the 5th epoch, which is where we're at right now, have a particular type of connection to them. What you see on the other side is a breakdown of the 9 ranks of the spiritual hierarchies. This is fundamental knowledge in the 3 monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that there are 9 specific ranks of spiritual beings or angelic beings: angels, archangels, archai, then the Elohim, who the Greeks called the exousiai, dynamis, kyriatetes, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim. And so every one of these have a particular name that you see here, which is their esoteric function. So spirits of form, or the Elohim. Interestingly enough, in the book of Genesis, where it talks about the creation of the world, it doesn't say God created the world, it says Elohim created the world. Elohim is actually a plural in the original Hebrew, because I am is the plural suffix in Hebrew. A singular being would be Eloha, but the Elohim is saying that this is a particular set of beings. And then in the teachings that came out, particularly in the early Christian centuries, through the works of Dionysius the Areopagite, which I'm not going to go into detail on because even the name is difficult to pronounce. The works of Dionysius the Areopagite describe the 9 ranks of the spiritual hierarchies, but it was a Kabbalistic understanding before that. But again, all of these ranks of the spiritual hierarchies are related to specific functions.
What book is that graph from?
That's from a wonderful book called The Burning Bush by a man named Edward Smith. And Burning Bush is a fantastic overview of esoteric knowledge hidden inside the Old and New Testaments, with a over 100-page supplement in the back that derives schematics and diagrams from a wide range of Rosicrucian books, mostly by Steiner, that are extremely helpful. Very good book to start with. And so one of the modern expressions of Rosicrucianism was the work of Rudolf Steiner. And I say it's one of the most major expressions because, number one, Rudolf Steiner, born in 1861, died in 1925, he either wrote or gave lectures that have been collected in books that now run to a collection of over 350 volumes. So Steiner's own works are over 350 volumes. They're a kind of encyclopedia of esoteric knowledge. There's so much in there, it's incredible. But also it gave way to a wide range of practical initiatives. So again, things like biodynamic agriculture came directly out of Steiner's group, and Waldorf education. And there's even a branch of medicine called anthroposophic medicine that you find in Germany and elsewhere that has really remarkable insights into the energetic structures of human beings in the world. And as Elizabeth introduced yesterday, eurythmy is a part of that as well. And eurythmy basically makes the etheric life forces visible. And this is actually part of a larger esoteric understanding, which is basically that we are at a stage today where we need to develop etheric perception. We need to develop the capacity to perceive the movement of energy, because that's going to move us to the next stage of our development. And so one thing that eurythmy does is it allows the physical body to become more fluid. So instead of being very rigid all the time, the physical body can actually move with the etheric currents in a more free way. And we can actually express the etheric currents that work with the energies of the planets, the sounds, all types of things. And as Elizabeth mentioned yesterday, when we speak, the forms that the larynx creates is actually an inversion or turning inside out of the movements in the human energy body that come with certain forces. So this is one of the great secrets of esoteric development, that the forms that we create in sound through the larynx are actually a turned inside out geometry of the movement of energy forms in the human energy body. So there's an aspect of sacred geometry that has to do with self-transformation. And I threw up with this a picture of Knights Templar, just because I'm partial to them, and think they have a particular romantic appeal in the West today for a type of esoteric development. And that is that at the mental level, we develop the capacity to understand and directly perceive the patterns of sacred geometry. At the emotional level, we expand our soul life to be able to directly experience all the living qualities of nature. Because one thing that is definitely happening to humanity today is that we live indoors all the time, we're cut off from nature, often we live in cities where there's almost no nature at all, and so our soul life becomes crippled. We're no longer fully experiencing all of the internal feelings that we should have when we're exposed to the full life of nature. And that actually has an extremely detrimental effect on human beings. Then at the vibrational level, something very important there, which is that we need to extend our ability to actually feel the dynamic life forces in nature. And this is often referred to as developing the body of light in certain traditions. And in the biogeometry work, we've referenced this many times as developing the capacity to become aware of all the different qualities of vibration around us that are normally invisible to us. So where this is meant to go is to be able to develop the levels of our own subtle body, to perceive and experience and to work directly with all of those energetic qualities that make up the world, which at one level of structure, to understand them, we can perceive as sacred geometry. So this brings us to our next topic, which is the temple science, the hidden energy science of sacred geometry. And so we're going to start by giving, for those of you that haven't taken the biogeometry course, or for those who have, I want to draw connections here to the work we're doing in sacred geometry, to some of the work coming out of modern Egyptian biogeometry and our friend Dr. Ibrahim Karim. Dr. Karim, again, is the person that developed this body of work and comes to North America every couple of years to offer advanced trainings in it. And he's done a remarkable job of bringing forward information, some related to the... What's that? Oh.
He wants to say more. I'm sorry.
An Indian occultist would say in his next lifetime he's going to be reborn as, you know, some higher state.
He's behind, now he's right behind you.
So one of the things that Ibrahim Karim has achieved is that in addition to the specific applications in biogeometry that he's managed to develop, he has also developed a framework of understanding that is really a blueprint for a new science of energy, a new science of quality, which is very important. He calls it the physics of quality. So let's just take a few looks at some of the things inside the biogeometry work of Dr. Karim that I think can be very helpful for us. Now, some of these ideas can be found elsewhere, but Dr. Karim has done a very good job of bringing them together into a cohesive whole and being able to practically apply them in the world. So one of the principles is energy, shape, and function. We have ambient energy in the world, but how does the energy know what function to perform? One way that it knows what function to perform is the shape that you move it into. So energy into shape creates function. These patterns that you see here are called in biogeometry biosignatures. And instead of seeing them as squiggly lines, look at them as a way that energy is moving. So essentially it's the way that energy moves that programs the energy to perform a function. Very important idea in sacred geometry. You program the function of the energy by the shape you move it into. Another important concept, that of quality and quantity being two sides of the same coin. And in biogeometry, we use the Pythagorean idea of the monochord. Pythagoras, from his training in the Egyptian temples, when he was teaching musical harmonics, showed the way that a simple one-string musical instrument has a perfect demonstration of the fact that quality and quantity are two sides of the same coin. Now, what I mean by this is that if I pluck a musical string, a scientist will look at it and say, well, this has a particular wavelength, it has a particular frequency, but on a quality side, I don't actually know the wavelength or the frequency just by hearing it. What I do know is the quality of the sound. There are two sides of the same coin. The two exist together, the quality and the quantity. The problem is that modern science has focused only on the quantity and has thrown quality out the window. It's not only gotten rid of quality, but it has also said that quality is not even permitted to be brought into a scientific discussion. And by doing so, it has thrown out the baby with the bathwater. It wanted to get rid of subjectivity, but instead it threw out all of the cumulative spiritual knowledge of humanity up to the present era. All the knowledge of Chinese medicine, all the knowledge of Ayurveda, all the knowledge of the great Mayan civilizations, all of that thrown away. They didn't know anything, only we know something. So we have to bring the quality science that they had back in, because they did know something, but theirs was a science of quality, not of quantity. And that leads us to the concept of transcendental energy qualities. The only part of it we're going to discuss right now for the purposes of this course is that we can look at the vital energy that makes up the world as different bands of energy. And those bands of energy can be given different designations. If it's within the expression of color, then it can be red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and then so-called invisible colors with the infrared, ultraviolet, black, white, etc. The basic idea of this is that if we're going to have a science of quality, we have to have a way to identify those different qualities. And quality expresses itself in the world in different ranges of energy, in different expressions. And the human body is set up to be able to perceive some of those ranges of qualitative expression. One range of quality that we can perceive are the qualities of sound. So we can perceive the 7 different notes of the musical scale, for instance. Or I can perceive the range of colors, and every one is distinct to me. Or there's even a range of feeling or touch. Something is smooth, or it's sticky, or it's rippled, something of that kind. Or taste, something is sweet, or it's savory, or it's sour. All of these things are scales the human body is based on. So we use qualitative scales. And the basic idea of this for us is that all these scales actually work together. That it's the same qualities being expressed at different octaves of energy. At one octave of energy, the range of energy qualities is expressed as color. At another range of energy, those qualities are expressed as sound, etc., etc. So that all of these qualities come together into a central matrix. That basically means that there is a hidden relationship between sound and color and shape and angle and proportion. They're all part of the same unified language. They're just different expressions of the qualities. One of the basic ideas here then is that in some traditions they will talk about movement being the first thing that brought the world into creation. Others will talk about sound. And you'll hear about these seed syllables in the Indian tradition, for example. So what we have then is at this deeper level is an understanding that all of these are expressions of the same thing. And one of the primary fields in metaphysics today that people look at for this idea is a field called cymatics or kymatics. Basic idea here is that if you put some type of light powder, the classical thing is to put a particular natural spore called lycopodium powder on a vibrating plate, then according to the vibration that you put into the plate, the powder will form into different shapes. And that's what you see here on the left-hand side of the screen. It started from an amorphous mass of powder, then I put a particular sound quality into it. You could draw a violin bow on it or play a sound, and then it forms into a particular geometric form. If you bring together multiple sound frequencies at once, then what you see on the right-hand side can happen, which is that the powder can actually come together, rise up three-dimensionally, and then move like a living being, which is something quite remarkable. And there's a very good book that summarizes the kymatics work, and there's also DVDs available of the films that they made showing how sound becomes shape. One of the things that they've done with the cymatics is they've used not only powder, but they sometimes use liquids and things of that kind to show how sound becomes shape. And so what they found in some of these experiments is that the sound vibrations will create these perfect matrices, these nets of energy. So this gives us a visual for what we've talked about with the masters of the net lineage and this background blueprint of energy. So the energy quality expressed in the sound then forms matter into these particular shapes. In other words, shape and sound, two sides of the same coin. This is very specifically brought out in some traditions, such as in the Hindu tradition, where they say that there are certain mantric sounds that they use, like Om, the seed syllable of creation, that is actually the sound that is the same thing as the form that you see with the Sri Yantra. So here with the Sri Yantra, again, you might have a particular meditation given to you by an Indian guru, and they would say that along with this particular mandala meditating on the triangles and the points in it, you could also use the form of the Om mantra because they're the same thing. So to demonstrate this, one group created a type of kymatics device that was electronic. And when they chanted the Om into their kymatics device, they got the image that you see on the right-hand side, showing you that literally the sound itself does create the Sri Yantra. It was just a philosophical thing for most people in the West before. Now we can see that no, literally that sound is the equivalent of that shape. So we then have to have practical ways that we can actually test and pick up these energies, because these energies are not electromagnetic in nature. You know, we've only had electromagnetic technology for about 100 years, but somehow in science it has become such a holy grail that if it's not electromagnetic, it doesn't exist, that they won't even accept or think about any types of energies that an electromagnetic meter doesn't pick up. It's as if it's not real. But nonetheless, there are all types of activities that we know electromagnetic meters will not pick up, including virtually everything with vital energy. So we have to have a way to pick it up, and for thousands and thousands of years, in addition to developing direct spiritual perception of the energies, one of the things that humanity has done is has used particular tools to extend the human energy field to perceive the different energy qualities, what we might call dowsing or radiesthesia. This is a classical practice. We have evidence of it going back at least 5,000 years. It's a mistake to throw it out. So that one of the things we use in biogeometry are some recent French innovations for testing these energy qualities. So in this particular method, we divide the vital energy qualities up that make up our world into 12 different bands. And we can then actually detect those different bands by using this device called the virtual cone pendulum, because the angle created by the movable disc on the central rod creates different angles from the outer edge of the disc to the lower part of the rod. And by changing the angle, you're changing the energy quality that you detect. It's no different than the idea of refracting white light through a prism. And according to the angle of refraction, you will get a specific wavelength frequency and a specific color. So by tuning into a specific angle, that gives us a way to tune into these specific transcendental energy qualities. So that angle can correlate to picking up the energy quality of a specific sound, or of a specific color, or of a specific type of vital energy, whatever it might be, because they all work in the same scale. They're just expressions at different octaves. And this brings us to the very important concept of resonance. Resonance, we normally think of in terms of music or in sound. If I have two tuning forks, I strike one and it vibrates. I bring it close to a second tuning fork tuned to the same frequency, which also, by the way, normally means it has the same shape and length. And when I bring the one that's struck close to the unstruck one will also vibrate. Why does it vibrate? Because they are tuned to the same resonant frequency. And if I get this one to vibrate, this one will vibrate too. So resonance is the natural method in which two things that have the same energy quality can vibrate together. And the energy and information of one can be transmitted to the next. This is a key to understanding the temple science of every spiritual tradition, understanding how resonance works. The things that have the same basic energy quality can go into resonance and exchange energy and information. That means that you can create resonance between two things with similar colors, two things with similar sounds, two things with similar shapes. That's what's going to be important for us here. Two things with similar shapes can exchange energy and information, but also because they're all part of the same energy spectrum, a particular sound can activate a color can activate a shape can activate an angle, etc., etc. That's a real key to the energy science. Now, following that idea up, this means that all the different shapes that we have in nature have specific energy qualities associated with them. This brings us to an idea of harmonics. So resonance and harmonics are absolutely vital. Harmonics can be a very, very deep topic. And what I want to bring out about it right now is that for our purposes related to biogeometry, one aspect of harmonics that's important for the temple science is that what harmonics demonstrates is that the same energy qualities are replicated octave after octave. It's the same energy qualities, but they're being expressed in one octave after another. And the expression of this in music or sound is on the piano keyboard, because I have the 7 notes of the musical scale. I have C all the way back up to B, and then the very next note is C again. The human ear and the human energy field is actually tuned, so you can hear the relationship between C at this octave and C at the next octave. And if you test them with things like the French device, you'll find that they have the same energy quality. So in other words, the same energy qualities are being replicated time and time again in octave after octave. And this was understood in the teachings that Pythagoras received from the Egyptian temples to mean that this is actually a model for the way that worlds are created within worlds, and that our physical world is one octave, and what we would think of in a general sense as the spiritual world moves in both directions. And so we are just one expression of these energy qualities in one octave, and the spiritual world continues in octave after that. One way to express that in many traditions would be as spiritual planes. Here's the next spiritual plane, here's the next one, here's the next one. But the same qualities occur on each one, but just at higher and higher octaves. What this basically means is that if I can find something in this world, here in the physical world, that has a particular energy quality, I can create resonance with something in a higher invisible world that has the same energy quality. And in stuff like sacred architecture and healing with sacred geometry, we do that through shape. It could also be done with color, sound, etc., etc. But we can do it with shape. The shapes will have particular energy qualities that we can work with, that can connect with and activate something in an invisible realm. This is connected to many teaching stories of the Sufis and other traditions. Let's talk about a few other energy principles here that might be helpful for us, also connected to the biogeometry work. One is the energy principle of connecting to center. We started with that yesterday, the whole idea of the first movement of creation being creating this boundary, the perfect boundary being the circle or the sphere, and the importance of the center of that. What the compass allows us to do is to create a fixed center, to create a perfect circle. Most of us, because we're not in touch with the center, can't draw that freehand. The compass is the tool that allows us to do it, and you see God with the compass creating the center and making that movement. So the connection to center is the place that everything happens, is the point of zero dimensionality that we described yesterday. And so the connection to center is shown in biogeometry if we actually test the center of a circle and I'm talking about a literal drawn circle in this case, we will find that there are 3 particular energy qualities that can be detected in the center of a circle. This is the energy qualities that are part of nature's system to balance all living energy fields. This is also related to concepts, for those of you that did the biogeometry work, of things like rotation. When you rotate something, you then create a center of the rotation, and something called virtual rotation, that some shapes will create a very strong emanation of those 3 energy qualities, because even though the shape is static, like if I have an 8-pointed star form, it's a static form, but energetically it's as if it was rotating. That creates a virtual center of the rotation and activates this energy function. Again, there's a lot of aspects here that are part of the biogeometry work we're not going to go into detail on here, but I want to give those of you that haven't done the training a basic idea, and those of you that have, to link that knowledge up to what we're doing here. At this point, let me also mention our beautiful Janissa Diamond 7 form that Marnie's been responsible for creating for us today. Thank you very much. Yes, and Mark, thank you very, very much. I appreciate y'all taking the time to do that for us. We're going to have this up for the rest of the course, and I'm going to talk about it in more detail later on. But you can see the way that it has these great circles on the surface of a sphere. Now you can actually get inside of it and move the circle lines. And there's an entire story to this that Marnie's going to tell us later in the week. But for those of us who are only here for the weekend, if you want to know more about this and find out about what you would do if you get inside of it, and let me just say one thing right now, the structure itself is fairly delicate. So if you get inside of it, don't hold on to it for support when you're trying to climb in. You have to climb in without touching the structure and get in and make sure you're okay there. So for those, just for those people who are here only for the weekend, Marnie is going to give an introduction to this right after we end at the very beginning of lunch. For the rest of us, we'll do it in class later on in the week. But if you're only here for the weekend, that'd be the time to check it out. So energy principle number 1, connect to center. It's one of the primary things we do in biogeometry to access these 3 energy qualities. What are the 3 energy qualities? I'll give you just a very quick overview of what they are, because there's a whole energy science here of different energy qualities and their functions. So I'll just give you some examples of these 3 energy qualities that you would find if you energetically analyze the center of a circle. The first one is what the Egyptians called the spiritual carrier wave. It was known to the ancients. It's created by a variety of different forms. What it basically does is it creates an energetic vibration that can transmit energy and information from one place to another place. The second one is often referred to as the spiritual light in many traditions, and the Egyptians also call it, for very precise reasons, the atmosphere of the angels. Its technical name is the higher harmonic of ultraviolet, because it is in resonance with ultraviolet lighter energy in our world, but it actually is at a higher octave. It's not here in the physical world, but it has an effect here, and we can work with the energy quality of it here. And the third aspect that we get in touch with, if we analyze the energy in the center of the circle, is that of the higher harmonic of gold. The higher harmonic of gold is an energy quality that is similar, actually directly connected to the energy quality of physical gold. But physical gold is a kind of a condensation in the physical world of this energy quality. And where it actually goes to at higher octaves is to a particular spiritual realm that the Egyptians call the plane of divine wisdom. This plane of divine wisdom, when a person does intense spiritual activities and connects to very high spiritual levels, then they will develop this aura of golden energy around the head or around the entire body. And that's what you see around the heads or the bodies of great spiritual masters in the paintings and iconography of many, many, many different spiritual traditions. It's a universal mystery. They know that this gold energy exists. So this higher harmonic of gold is considered by the Egyptians to be the highest of the 3 energies that you access in the center of the circle. And these 3 energies actually can be accessed in a variety of ways. Now, one aspect of this is that in working with these energies, part of it is to do work in the world, whether it's in healing work with people or in constructing the energy in a location in sacred architecture to have the right energy qualities. Many of the principles of sacred architecture have to do with creating these three energies within the structure. But there's also the aspect that in working with this, it is meant to transform us. We are meant to go into resonance with those energies. And so that's the whole idea with things like the descent of the dove of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost in the Christian tradition, where you then have the lighting up of the gold around the head of the disciples, of basically getting in resonance with these energy qualities for beneficial effects for us as part of human spiritual evolution. And so part of that is connecting to center. We always say, well, you need to get centered. But there's a very literal aspect of it, of connecting to center. Next slide, please. Which has to do with our own evolution. I also just want to bring out one quick thing here. I mentioned it the other day, but that is that the classic Masonic compass and square, I mentioned the other day, were actually energy tools in a sense. Because in laying out a design for sacred architecture or for things of that kind, the compass itself, again, creates a circular form. When you create a circular form, or even a rotation of an arc, you will begin to light up this BG3 energy in the center of that form. And then there are various things that we teach in biogeometry to intensify that energy emanation in the location. So what the compass does is it lays out the circular aspect, which then gives you access to the BG3. The square is then bringing in that linear aspect. And we talked the other day about the mystery of the squared circle that's connected to that. But the square, as an actual 90-degree angle, has another very interesting aspect to it, which is that if you test the energy coming from a 90-degree angle, you will find that it gives you an emanation of what the Egyptians call the spiritual carrier wave. It's this particular energy quality. And so it allows you to lay a structure that creates an energy wave quality from it. This was leveraged in classical sacred architecture with the cornerstone principle. Why do you create a cornerstone of a building that has sacred objects or something that has the energy quality of the building in it? Because things that are put in the corner of that right angle will emanate throughout the entire structure. When the French rediscovered this principle in the 1930s in their rare text, which Jane Weaver has translated into English for the first time, and she makes available, they talked about the way that when you test the energy coming from a pure right angle corner and you put an object there, you can actually energetically detect reflections of that object throughout the space. Basically what happens is that that right angle corner of a space creates that carrier wave function. Something you put in the corner radiates out through the entire space. So sometimes when we work with Dr. Kareem, he will jokingly say, make sure that you don't throw all your junk in the corner of the room, or else you'll have the junk in you. It gets reflected through the space. The corner is a place that you put something of a beneficial energy quality to radiate through the location. But I'm trying to connect some dots here so that the compass and the square have a particular application as an energy science. And most everything you read about the Masons today that talk about Masonic lore is 99% philosophical. It's like, oh, it represents this and it represents that and it's all symbolic, because they lost the energy science of it. It has a practical application connecting to specific energy qualities. Now, these three energy qualities I've talked about as what you find in the center of the circle. But everything is connected in the net through these resonance principles, so that it's not only the center of a circle that you find these three energy qualities. When a human being does sincere blessing and prayer, their field becomes full of these three energy qualities. Specific shapes can create this energy quality. Specific number patterns, like 16 of a specific object in an identifiable grouping, will create this energy quality. That 16 is related to the power of the golden proportion that we'll talk about later in the course, and to other aspects of the number 16 that you see in different traditions. Connecting to the center, we talked about. Rotation and virtual rotation, we talked about. Angular relationships, so that particular angles will also give you a BG3 effect. And that's what the Egyptians call these three energy qualities, the biogeometry 3 or the BG3. In fact, it's Dr. Ibrahim Karim who discovered these three energy qualities coming to the center and with all of these effects. It's something quite remarkable. We also find these exact same three energy qualities naturally in every chakra of the human body, in every acupuncture point of the human body. They're found in the cell structure. They're found in every spiritual power spot in nature. It doesn't matter what the local tradition is that guards that power spot in nature. If you test the quality of that power spot, it has these three energy qualities. And it's found in other things too, like certain genetic forms. That's okay? So again, the basic idea is that these three energy qualities can actually be emanated through specific things, but the concept that unites them all is that the BG3 energy qualities found in the center of the circle has to do with nature's centering capacity. It has to do with how nature balances energy by connecting it to center. That's why the center of the circle and all these other phenomena that according to our logical, linear Western thought are not linked up normally, they are all actually energetically linked and will all create this energy quality. Next. Okay, the next energy principle that we should be aware of in working with sacred geometry is that of geometric resonance. Well, we talked about resonance per se, and in being able to create resonance between specific things. So for our purposes in sacred geometry, geometric resonance is important. That means that shapes or patterns that are similar can be made to go into resonance with each other and exchange energy and information. In the biogeometry course, one way we demonstrated that is through the system of biosignatures. What the biosignatures are basically are two-dimensional patterns that represent the three-dimensional movement of energy within the human body, within particular organ systems, for example, that create specific functions. Remember, energy into shape creates function. So when the vital energy, the chi, ki, prana, whatever you want to call it, the vital energy enters into the body and moves through an internal organ, let's say in this case it's the heart. It's going to move within the envelope of the heart in particular shapes. The shapes that the energy moves in the heart creates a specific function. That means there might be 12 different energy movements within the heart, and every one of those energy movements creates a different function of the heart. One might cleanse and filter the blood. One might sustain the rhythm of the heartbeat. Another might coordinate the activity of the different chambers of the heart, etc., etc. So when we then work with the actual pattern of that energy moving in the heart and transmit it energetically to a person, if that movement pattern has somehow been impaired in their energy body through trauma or physical damage or illness or whatever, by transmitting to them the correct energy pattern that their body needs for that function, their body can then absorb that to help bring that energy circulation back into balance. That's an illustration of the concept of geometric resonance. It has many other ways that it can be approached too, but I want to give you the basic idea. So the basic idea, again, we could see this in something like Taoist yoga, Qigong, or particularly medical Qigong, where they will have hospitals in China where if you have a lung problem, have you do specific movements for hours a day. But if you have a kidney problem, it's a completely different movement that you might be doing, because that movement is related to the energy quality that will heal that function. So there's the straightforward aspect of creating resonance between two things in the physical world that have a similar shape, getting them to resonate together. In this case, the biosignature, which has a drawn form of the shape, and that actual energy pattern in a person's body. But a greater aspect of geometric resonance is that the same principle works to connect something in the physical world that has a particular shape to the thing in the higher worlds that has the archetype of that shape. We talked before about ideal forms. Plato's idea of archetypes or ideal forms. These are the blueprints behind the energies in the shapes in the physical world. So we said that every circle in our world has a relationship to the archetypal circle. The archetypal spiritual circle, the thought form in the mind of God found in the higher realms, has no specific size or color. It is the pure concept of the circle. And we shouldn't take this abstractly or philosophically. This is a literal thing, the actual archetype living in the higher worlds of this form. Now the same thing is true when we start working with shapes here in the phenomenal world. The shapes here are emanations of that archetype here into the physical world, where it does take on a certain size, a certain color, certain characteristics. Now this becomes something we work with in biogeometry, where we then find that specific shapes will connect us to certain things in higher worlds. So for instance, the form of an upright pyramid or a dome will connect us to the astral plane. It will also connect us to the astral level of a human being, because the astral level of a human being is nothing other than a detachment from the astral plane that I have individualized and made a part of my subtle bodies. It all had to come somewhere, just like my physical body had to come from the earth. So in this particular system in biogeometry, particular shapes allow us to connect in resonance to where the archetype of that shape comes from in a higher world. So that's the concept of geometric resonance. And to understand its application better, we should talk about the next energy principle, which we talk about in biogeometry, which is shape-caused waves. Shape-caused waves is the idea that the French developed, which has to do with the actual energies that come from a shape. This is a very big concept, has a lot of applications, has a whole science associated with it. Again, we do more detail on the biogeometry course, and there's a lot of stuff from the French and the translations by Jane. But the upshot of it is that when we talk about these different bands of energy, different shapes, if you test them, have different energy qualities coming from them. So the French use the term shape-caused wave for the actual energy given off by a shape. Why is it that if you go into sacred architecture locations, a temple, a cathedral, a mosque, they have these very specific forms? Why is that sacred? Why don't they just use some other form?
I can do that.
It has to do with the energy coming from the shape itself. So here we have a diagram from a German text showing the emanation of energy from particular ceiling rib sections within a Gothic cathedral. And that according to the shape of them, they're emanating energy in a particular form. And then at the Hagia Sophia, with these great domes over the structure, the dome itself is emanating a particular energy quality. In fact, the energy quality associated with the form of a dome or a pyramid is that of the spiritual carrier wave. From another perspective, in geometric resonance, it connects to the astral plane. So there's all types of deep interconnections here. And we said that the dome and pyramid form with the astral, in connecting to the astral, why is it that in the ancient world, pyramids were used all over the world? There are pyramids that have been discovered in China, in Central America, in South America, in Egypt, etc., that are used for spiritual initiation. Because there's a resonance that takes place between that shape and a part of the spiritual world they're trying to connect to. In the deeper part of this, you can actually find some shapes and designs in some parts of cathedrals, etc., that are meant to resonate with other spiritual levels, higher spiritual planes, for example. So this is a science. This is the true temple science. This isn't just the philosophical stuff that you read about the Masons today. This was the original concepts between sacred design. And so if you go to Giza and you look at the Great Pyramids, there's a classical tradition that someone would be initiated lying down on the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. And so one of the central ideas there is that the whole form they were lying in, the pyramid itself. Why a pyramid? Because it resonates with the particular realm they're trying to connect to. But also something has happened. We're not going to go into detail in it here, but in biogeometry we demonstrate that the pyramids at Giza Plateau actually have a slight half a degree indentation down the center of all four faces. And if you test the energy quality coming from that, what you find is that that has changed not only the energy quality that you detect, it has also changed what the shape resonates with. So instead of the general pyramid shape resonating with the general astral plane, so if I then test energetically the pyramid, I find it has energies that are both beneficial and detrimental, just like the astral plane does. If I modify the shape of the pyramid and then I test it, then I've gotten rid of the detrimental and I've magnified the beneficial. Because what's now happened is that by changing the shape, I have specialized the resonance of the form to resonate with the higher astral and not the general astral. That's one of the secrets of the Egyptian temple science. But the overall temple science concept is that, number one, shapes will resonate according to their design with something in higher worlds and connect. That's our principle of geometric resonance. And then at the next stage, when I test the energy coming off of the shape vibrationally, I get a particular energy quality, but part of that in the hidden realm is linked to what it's resonating with geometric resonance. So I want you to grok this idea that geometric resonance and the shape-caused wave, in other words, what the shape resonates with at a higher level, and the energy I'll actually detect coming from the shape, the two things are linked. Why did the energy quality of the pyramid improve after I made the modification to the shape? It's because the change to the shape also modified what it resonated with in another realm. And by resonating with something different in a higher realm, the energy quality I detected around it changed. Now this is no different than what you all already know at a particular level when you think about things that in metaphysics we say, if you think negative thoughts and you're a very hostile person, you're going to have some detrimental energy in your field. Well, when you have very hostile and detrimental thoughts, you're going to resonate with something detrimental, and the energy quality will then be present in the field. Resonate with something beneficial, test the energy field, it's full of beneficial energies. It's very straightforward. But we simply want to have that concept of how we can apply that to understanding true sacred geometry and the original temple science of sacred geometry, not all this abstract philosophical stuff you get today. So here's Dr. Karim with Dr. Masaru Emoto, the famous fellow who done all the work on water crystallization. And as one way of showing this link between these energy qualities and shape once again, they've been doing projects together where Dr. Karim will use particular geometric forms to create energy emanations that then structure the crystallization of the water and give you crystals like this. So if you were to see a picture of the crystal beforehand, it's very amorphous. Then after the BG3 energy is applied to it, this is the shape that you get with the water crystal. So that these energies actually create crystallization effects in water. Well, what does that mean when our energy body, when my physical and energy bodies are in a location full of these energy qualities? If my body is 70% or more water, that means I'm getting a structuring effect in the body itself. So this is reflecting what I talked about before, that these energies will actually structure the subtle body, and that every practice you do structures your subtle body. But it's not just the subtle body, it's also aspects of the physical body, like even the water in the body becomes structured. And this is from a press conference they gave together, where he was showing one of the forms that he used to actually structure the water, which is one of these biogeometry cubes. And again, in the biogeometry work, they have very specific shapes that they use, and so the whole thing is shaped a particular way. And then on every face of the cube, there are particular forms that have particular resonances and particular shape-caused waves coming from them. Next. That then brings us to another body of work that none of you have asked me about, and that we have some of the devices here, and that's the Slim Sperling work. For those of you that know Slim, I was really tickled to find this picture of Slim in the upper left-hand corner where he's got like this big flower. It's really a funny picture. Normally when you meet him, he looks like this old grizzled Marlboro man type of guy, and doesn't normally look like that, but I thought it was a great picture of Slim. Slim is a very interesting character. He ran a major blacksmithing school in Colorado. He's like a combination of a mystic and a blacksmith. And when you meet him, he's like the most down-to-earth Western cowpoke type of guy you'd ever want to meet. But I've always gone along great with Slim. I like him a lot. And for years, it was hard to get access to the information about his tools. But recently, he's published a book that you see in the upper right-hand corner. We have some copies of here that I got from him, Slim Sperling's Universe. And he's got some DVDs on how his work is too. Because there are particular principles in his work that's very interesting. Now his actual tools are basically sacred geometry forms cast in metal. And by putting the form in metal, then of course he is creating a particular type of energy quality coming from that sacred geometric concept stabilized in physical space within the metallic form. So of course one of the classic things is the form of the helix, which becomes a coil. And one of the coils actually is shaped in a kind of a horseshoe. And what happens is the energy is drawn in to one end of the horseshoe, spins, cleans, is energetically charged, and then comes out the other side. So you can do something like you can wear it here on the collar, or you can put it to any type of an energy circuit to move and clean and intensify the energy in the circuit. When I first started working with Slim stuff back in the 80s, I had just come from one of his workshops. I had one of his feedback loops, they call them, one of the horseshoe forms there. And I had a friend who was a naturopath in Canada. She said, I have a client who has stage 4 lung cancer, and it's terminal, and I'm working with him. And she said, I wonder, if this thing would help him. And I said, well, it helps me with my breathing and things of that kind, so maybe so. So I gave it to her to take with her. And she wrote me back later and said this guy who'd been sent home to die with stage 4 lung cancer was now in remission from wearing this thing at his throat. Because again, it's taking the energy in and cleaning it. I don't want to make any medical claims for anything. It's simply the report that I got back. But the basic idea is that you move energy for healing effects. So slim stuff is based on this idea. Then the rings that you see over here, the rings create an energy field inside of them. The rings actually have a couple of metal wires that are braided together in a particular spiral form and then linked together. And they create inside of it a particular energy quality, a very beneficial energy, that also works as an energy amplifier. And one thing that I've used them for before, and some of you have heard this story from me before, is as a thought form amplifier. So that if you send a thought form through them, it'll get fairly strongly amplified. So they have a lot of different uses that, for those of you interested, I really recommend his book and the DVDs. But I'll talk about just a few principles behind his work right now. First one I just mentioned, geometric energy movements are then cast in form in the metal itself. This is also related to some tools you see in the ancient world where they use this principle. Now the energy quality of the metals have an effect. The actual shape themselves will have an effect regardless of the substance that you use. But every substance that you use adds in its own energy quality to the energy circuit that you've created. So when he uses copper, then that has a particular energy quality. So if I had a coil made of copper, it will move the energy beneficially and have the energy quality of the copper with it. But if you made it out of pure sterling silver, it would have a different energy quality coming from the silver. And so he tends to work with copper, silver, and gold. So he will sometimes layer these metals together. So the base of it is copper, and then he'll put on a layer of gold or a layer of silver and gold. And so all those energy qualities come together. Now this is also related to the concept that some of you are familiar with from the work of Wilhelm Reich called the orgone box. An orgone box is basically something that has multiple layers of material, and it intensifies energy inside of it from the materials that are layered together. In ancient Egypt, they used this principle of using silver and gold together quite a bit. And there's a naturally occurring ore to the south of Egypt called electrum. And you'll see a lot of references to electrum in ancient Egypt. And that electrum is a natural composite of silver and gold. So if you test the energy from things, the energy quality you get from something layered with silver and gold on top of the copper is different from what you get with the copper by itself. A very important aspect of understanding Slim's work is that he has very specifically made the things according to sacred lengths. Particularly, he uses the old Egyptian sacred cubit. And he's done a lot of research into sacred measurements in the ancient world. And he prefers, for most things, the Egyptian sacred cubit. Everything that he makes is either a fraction of, an even fraction, or a multiple of the Egyptian sacred cubit. And there's another form he uses called the lost cubit. That when he and another researcher began to put together all the information they could compile from the ancient world of different sacred measurements, that had a particular progression to the different measurements they found, but there was one stage that was missing, that was not represented. And they called that the lost cubit measurement. This comes from the work of a German named Hans Becker. And so he began to make things according to the length of the lost cubit. And they found that the effect of these tools made in the lost cubit was different from those made according to the Egyptian royal cubit. And it seemed to be more powerfully linked to the etheric vibration level than the Egyptian royal cubit. And they're still experimenting with it, but he makes tools available in the Egyptian cubit, most of them, and some according to this lost cubit measurement. Now, one idea about why are these measurements important is that these measurements from sacred systems have to do with particular wavelengths. So if we think of modern science, we know about wavelengths and frequencies. Those of you that have a background in things like Royal Rife's work know that specific frequencies can be used for healing effects, for instance, in the human body. So the length of these things is then related to a wavelength or a frequency as well. This is then linked up to another body of work called global scaling. Most people in the West today are not aware of global scaling. It's a German body of work that is extremely interesting, and there are some websites available about global scaling. Somewhere in your handouts I give you some global scaling websites you can check out. And the global scaling work is based on this German research where they looked at frequency ranges, and they looked at wavelengths and frequencies according to standing waves. And they found that there's a kind of universal system of standing waves that exist at all levels of creation, from the subatomic up to the galactic, where everything's linked together in this type of magnetic slinky of vibratory waveforms. And in working with that, there are particular nodal points in the waveform where the energy is optimized. And when you find that optimal nodal point in the length of the waveform, you get the strongest effect. So for one example, in the global scaling work, they were examining infrared healing devices. And you might get an infrared healing device. I'm not guaranteeing you that these measurements I'm going to say are correct, but you might get one that's tuned to, let's say, 880 nanometers in the infrared healing device. But they might find that in global scaling, that it's exactly 782 nanometers that you hit the sweet spot in the standing wave to get the optimal effect. And so by using this, you can find optimal links to use to apply energetically to get the best effect. So one other thing with Slim's work is that it's connected to research he did at one time with the work of Wilhelm Reich. So I mentioned before about the work of the, with the layering, like the orgone that Reich did. Well, Wilhelm Reich is a whole fascinating study in himself. We'll talk a bit more about it on Wednesday when we talk about shapes corresponding to elemental forces. But one thing that Reich managed to do is he managed to change the etheric pulsation, or the vibratory pulsation, in the human body or in nature to help heal various types of conditions. And so one thing that Slim integrated into his tools was this concept of changing the etheric pulsation to a more healthy rhythm in a human being or in nature. So one thing that Reich did was something he called cloud busting. He did one project where he went to the desert in the Southwest, and he made it rain in Death Valley as a demonstration that he could do it. And he did it with something he called a cloud buster. And so the tools that Slim has are related to this. And there should be an insert in your binder. That's a private research report that Slim sent me about this form here. This form he has at various sizes. This is the large size. They're quite expensive at this size. He calls that the storm chaser. They go all the way down to smaller sizes that you wear or that you put in a room or that you put in an agricultural field. Basically, it creates a toroidal circulation of energy. And I'll tell you about the torus in a couple of days. But basic idea here is that he used Reich's ideas to be able to affect the weather, create rain in drought areas, things of that kind. So Slim's tools also have an application there. Next slide.
Should we pause for a second?
No, we're going to keep going. So-
No, I mean pause for me to put a new tape in. Not.
So, next topic is union of spiritual and scientific knowledge. In university. So it's not like he doesn't know physics, but he knows that physics well enough to then hook up its actual empirical observations, what we actually know in physics, with what he knows from his own background, coming from a Vedantic Indian esoteric background, being Indian in origin. So when we talk about this union of spirit and science, there's an aspect here of looking at how things get their form from a spiritual origin, and then how we find those exact same forms in modern scientific research. I mentioned the other day that modern science has basically rediscovered bits and pieces of the old energy knowledge and the temple science of earlier times through pure empirical research, so that you can find a one-to-one match between the shapes described thousands of years ago in Greece and other traditions with the exact same shapes being empirically rediscovered today in modern physics, biology, and chemistry. Now, one of the most fundamental forms that we have in creation, and a very important form, is that of the tetrahedron. The tetrahedron is created simply by you have a triangle as a base, and then on that triangular base, you have three other triangles arranged around it. Again, later in the course, I'm going to actually build these different forms so you'll understand them better. But a tetrahedron is the simplest form that can enclose three-dimensional space with straight lines. Triangular base, three triangles at the top. And classically, there are very important spiritual concepts associated with the form of the tetrahedron. Because if you look at the base triangle as representing the Trinity, then the one point at the top is the unity, the one, how the one becomes three and the three becomes one. So it's a geometric mystery that is linked to a spiritual mystery, because it started as a thought form in the mind of God that led to the unity of God manifesting itself as a Trinity. And it's not just Christianity that talks about a Trinity. There are multiple traditions that talk about Trinities. You find it all over the place. So the Trinity is the base of the tetrahedron. Then the unity, the one, is the point at the top, because there are 4 points. And the beautiful thing about the form of the tetrahedron is that no matter what way you turn it, the Trinity is always a base, and the unity is always the place at the top. So one expression of that in Christian esotericism is what you see right there. Same concept. So we're finding a lot of applications of the tetrahedron in modern science and technology. One of the great guides to this is the work of Buckminster Fuller. In fact, Buckminster Fuller's works, which I talk quite a bit about in your handouts in the resource guide section, go into quite a bit of detail about the tetrahedron and the other Platonic solids. And among the things he talks about there is that he can model the correct form and twist of the DNA helix according to a group of interlocked tetrahedra. He calls it the tetrahelix. And he then shows that there's this tetrahedral aspect in the way that DNA is formed. It's a linked tetrahedral system. So if the DNA is this basic encoding of who we are and the creation of life on the planet, and if we then connect it back up to the spiritual concepts of the essence of the tetrahedra being the unity connected to its expression through Trinity, then we have, I think, a unification of some very important concepts. In the other picture we have here on the right-hand side, this is an actual painting done by Buckminster Fuller of photons, where he demonstrated that the form of photons, of actual light itself, is tetrahedral. Next. There is a tremendous amount of scientific work today being done that is showing what's called the Platonic solids in every phenomena that you can possibly imagine. And again, it wasn't until very recent times that we were able to take these pictures of molecular structures and things of this kind to actually show that things, yes, actually did have this form. But this has been taught for a very long time. Versions of Platonic solids have been found from easily 4,000 years ago in the region of the world that is currently Scotland. The Greeks were teaching it very aggressively 2,500 years ago. The Egyptians had forms of it before that. A lot of evidence for these forms that goes back a very long time. Now, the Platonic solids are basically the perfect divisions of a sphere. If you take a sphere and you start drawing patterns on it, and you try to find what patterns on the surface of a sphere, because the sphere is our first form, what patterns on the surface of that sphere will give you exactly the same shape with exactly the same angles, replicated all over the form. There's only 5 perfect forms you can get. One form is the tetrahedron. It has 4 triangles on it. Next form is the octahedron. It has 8 triangles on it. And it's like 2 pyramids base to base. The next one is the cube. And we all know the cube. Next one is the icosahedron. It has 20 triangles on it. And then finally, the dodecahedron has 12 pentagonal or 5-sided faces. These are the only 5 perfect divisions of the sphere. And again, you don't have to memorize all of them right now. We're going to do more work and you're going to build them later in the course. But with our topic right now, the union of spirit and science, I want to bring out that when the Greeks and others taught these forms, they talked about some of the significance of these forms. One of those things was that the icosahedron, which is the 20-sided triangular form, that the icosahedron, they said, was related to the element of water. And interestingly enough, Buckminster Fuller then predicted that the form of the virus was going to be based on an icosahedron. He said, why is it that we have such a hard time killing viruses? We have all of these antibiotics, but how come we have so few antivirals? Why is it so hard to kill a virus? He says the reason's got to be because the protein coat of the virus is icosahedral, and this is a very solid structure. It's hard to break the protein coat because of its actual geometric shape. That's why we have so few antivirals. It's a geometric mystery of why it's hard to break. And so, interestingly enough, there's been plenty of evidence since that time showing that indeed the core form of viruses is icosahedral. This is an electromagnetic image of an adenovirus particle. And it then goes on to discuss in the cartoon to the right that shows you its actual structure that it's a pure icosahedron. So when they talked about the icosahedron being linked to water, water is the foundation of life. According to modern biology, what is the simplest form of life that exists? It's the virus. It is the simplest form of life. And it's based on a pure icosahedron. This is an important principle for us. When things exist in their simplest possible forms, they will take on the pure geometric archetype. When they become more complex and they get layered on one geometric archetype on top of the other, then you don't necessarily recognize it. We have icosahedral aspects of our energy body, but you don't see it as clearly in our physical form. We're a more complex structure. For a pure virus, simple life connected to water, just like the Greeks said, pure icosahedron. So again, they related all of these different forms to different things, to the different elements, etc. And one of the things that they talked about, for some of this, because of time, we're just going to get into it later in the course when we get to the Platonic solids, because we're going to do a lot about the Platonic solids. But to make this connection now to the idea of the union of spirit and science through sacred geometry, the Greeks, basically through the writings of Plato, who trained in the Pythagorean school in Greece, said a few things in his work. One is that the Platonic solids are the keys to all manifestation on earth. Another is that the dodecahedron is the pattern of the earth itself. Now the thing about that is that this dodecahedron, this 12-sided structure, every side is a pentagon, as you see here, and at the upper right-hand corner there, the Greeks actually never talked about this form publicly. The only ones they talked about publicly were the four you see right here. These are directly referenced in the works of Plato and the Neoplatonic school. The fifth one they never talked about publicly. And so when he said the dodecahedron is the pattern of the earth, he didn't come right out and say it's a dodecahedron. What he actually said in his writings is that the earth, when seen from above, appears like one of those 12-sided leather balls, because he was not permitted to use the name dodecahedron or to tell people about even the existence of this shape, because they considered that the dodecahedron had to be kept hidden. Only these four could be given to the public. This had to be kept hidden because whereas these four are connected to the earth, the water, the air, and fire, the four elements, this form, they said, is connected to the ether. This is connected to pure vital life force. It is the pure form of vital life force itself. And so they said we have to keep the dodecahedron hidden. They said that if you were to misuse this form, it would cause tremendous destruction. And I'm going to show you later in the course that this came to pass in 1945. This form caused tremendous destruction. But what I want to show you right now is just one demonstration of this, where they said the Platonic solids are the keys to the manifestation of the earth. I'll show you that later on. And that the dodecahedron is the literal pattern of the earth. Because in the 1970s, the Russian government, because they ran the government and they hired everybody, they got a group of scientists together for a government project where they were to find what is the basic form of the earth, what is the underlying structure of the earth from a geometric perspective. Because the Russians understood that there was a geometric aspect to this, as do many governments, which we'll talk about later. But in 1973, they published an article in a Russian journal, and the article translated into English was called, "Is the Earth a Giant Crystal?" And in that article, the Russians said that they had found that the basic form of the Earth is a dodecahedron. That gives you the basic structure of the Earth, and they determined that by looking at the energy centers of the Earth, where there's huge upwellings of energy, and according to the continental plates and other energetic phenomena. I said the underlying pattern of the Earth is dodecahedral. Since that time, similar research has been done by US government agencies, including NOAA and the Goddard Space Center, that have validated the Russian research. And this work has taken further. There's fantastic studies of Buckminster Fuller's that I'll show you later on, where he looked at the analysis of energy patterns on a sphere, what we call the Earth grid. And then other researchers from Governor State University in Illinois, Becker and Huggins, took this work further and began to actually identify the points on the Earth grid and their energetic functions and what they're connected to at different times. So the overall idea here, before we get into all those details later in the course, is simply the idea that the Greeks had identified the Platonic solids already, and one of their statements was that in a veiled form they said the dodecahedron is the actual pattern of the Earth, and then over 2,000 years later it's actually been scientifically verified. This is the background of the Earth. So particularly on our last day, one of the concepts of this course is that the weekend gives us an overview. Then the next 4 days of the course will teach us some of the primary letters of the divine alphabet, primary shapes and their functions. And then the last day is going to be devoted to the Earth itself, to the Earth grid. And at that time we're going to see how all those different patterns fit together in the energetic patterns of the Earth. And we'll go into more detail on the Earth grid at that time. But again, it's a wonderful demonstration of this idea of the union of spirit and science. And could I get somebody to go downstairs and see if lunch is ready?
Yes, it will be in about a minute.
In about a minute? Okay. Then that's good, because we're coming to the end of this. Buckminster Fuller was, again, this amazing modern genius dealing with the geometric foundation of creation. And he has a whole group of very important concepts. His books, Synergetics and Synergetics 2, which I describe in your handout on resources, are extremely important. Now, one of his ideas is that we don't need to be pessimistic about our possibilities for survival if we will only take advantage of what we now know about structure. He said, if we keep going on the way that we're going, then the whole Earth is going to go to hell in a handbasket, but it doesn't have to. We know enough to actually redeem the whole place, and we don't have to follow the Malthusian idea that there's not enough for everybody. He said, there's plenty for everybody if we know how to work with our resources better. He developed something called the world game that brought together all of these different ideas and all of the data that had been collected by modern government agencies and individual sources about exactly all the use of resources and available resources on the planet today. And in the world game, people would look at this in a complete context and say, how could we actually use this in a way that everybody wins? And it's a wonderful thing, and the world game is still being pursued today. So one of the ideas of Buckminster Fuller that's very important is the concept of synergy. So synergy for Buckminster Fuller has to do with the way that you can bring parts together to form wholes, and those wholes have behavior that cannot be predicted by the parts. So I have a quote from him at the top. He said, chemists found that every time they tried to isolate one element out of a complex, that the isolated parts and their separate behaviors never explained the associated behaviors at all. It always failed to do so. The chemist had to recognize that there were associated behaviors of wholes unpredicted by parts. They found there was an old word for it, synergy. And he gives a really good demonstration of this concept of synergy. He learned about this when he was actually a naval officer earlier in the last century. He says that's the example of chrome, nickel, steel. That if you look at every one of the components of modern chrome, nickel, steel, which has made possible things like jet aircraft. You couldn't have it before you had chrome, nickel, steel, because the metals couldn't take the stress. That iron itself has up to 60,000 psi tensile strength. Chrome, 70,000. Nickel, 80,000. Carbon and other components, 50,000 psi. If you were even to look at it as an addition, like, well, maybe if I put them all together, then maybe all of those psi would add up. The best that you would get then is 260,000 psi at best. But he says the actual psi tensile strength, pounds per square inch, of chrome, nickel, steel alloy is at least 350,000 psi. So you get a strength of the alloy that's far beyond any of the component parts. Not only is it a mass multiple of every part by itself, it's even more than if you tried to add up every one of the individual parts together. And so that's why he's talking about synergy. He's saying that we are now finding ways to bring together parts to make wholes in a way that allows us to do much more with less resources. And he then created a system where he created things like prefabricated housing. And he created all types of systems where we could use minimal resources to create the maximal effect. Bucky Fuller's stuff is absolutely critical for understanding where we're going today and how sacred geometry is the basis of it, because it's through the pure geometry that he identified. He calls it nature's design system, nature's coordinate system. If we understand this structure, we can do so much more. And so as we go through the course too, I'll be bringing out pieces of his knowledge connected to some of the shapes and designs we'll be looking at later. But also at the end of today, I'm going to do a little bit about sacred architecture, and I'm going to show you that we can be applying his ideas and other ideas today, because we're about to hit a new age of prefabricated parts for housing, not to make modular houses, not to make mobile homes, but to make high quality housing made from modular components. And so we can start building in a whole nother level of this. We can actually have an energy balanced housing from the parts that you buy at Home Depot and stick the parts together yourself like Legos. But we have to integrate at the beginning of this, which is just now starting, and I'll tell you about at the end of the day, the ideas of sacred geometry and the ideas of Bucky Fuller. It'll be very promising. So, theoretically, it is now time for lunch, and when it is going to be my time to talk again later in the day, we're going to pick up with holistic health and healing and move toward sacred architecture. The general energy lines of the Earth have both a beneficial energy quality and a detrimental energy quality. It's the same thing as our electromagnetic currents. They have both a beneficial and a detrimental energy quality to them. As we describe in the biogeometry training, if you test the actual energy quality of the Earth's energy radiation lines, because what they're releasing is really a type of radiation, and you then test the type of energy quality that you get with electromagnetic circuits, both of them are working with the energy quality that the Egyptians call the spiritual carrier wave. And because of resonance, the two can resonate together, because we are now using a toxic form of electromagnetic energy that is blanketing the Earth. The resonance effect between the electromagnetic technology emissions and the energy quality of the Earth lines has the effect of greatly amplifying the toxicity of the Earth lines. So in ancient times, they always built on the Earth lines, they tied into the Earth lines, etc. Today we have the challenge that in the last 100 years, the Earth lines have become much more toxic. And so we have to really work on trying to correct those Earth lines as we tie into them. So there's many, many issues related to this that we go into more detail on in the biogeometry course. But it's important to understand this when we deal with sacred geometry and the masters of the compass and creating sacred design and architecture on the Earth. So one example of the effect when you have these detrimental energy lines crossing is what you see in this picture here. And they've given you these color outlines of multiple lines of detrimental energy. And at the place that these are crossing, where the tree is, the form that you see there is something like a cancerous, tumorous growth on the body of the tree. And this is something that, of course, the old Chinese would know from the landscape school. They could look at the landscape, and where the tree has these cancerous, tumorous growths, they would say the energy is not so good here. And where everything is lush and fertile, then the energy is much better. So some of it is pure observation. If you test it energetically, you can see where the lines of energy are running and where they're crossing. But also just by pure observation. In fact, what got the modern German researchers onto doing their research that identified these earth grids was talking to farmers. Because the farmers said, oh yeah, we all know that by looking at the earth we can tell good energy is here, bad energy is there. If I put an animal at this location, they're going to have miscarriages, they're going to die young, they'll have tumors on their organs, etc. So that then got them to doing deeper bodies of research. And this really culminated in 1930 with a very famous project headed by a man named Gustav von Pohl in Willesberg, Germany. And he was looking at this phenomenon where in this location, 80% of the cancer cases were all concentrated in a 10% of the city. And so the question is, why do we have these cancer clusters? Because theoretically, cancer is not an environmental illness. It happens through God knows what. So why are they all clustered in this location? And so in 1930, they were then able to identify these earth energy lines and find that there was a strong concentration of these toxic energies in that particular location of the city. That then led to them finding the systematic aspect of these grids, which was really a rediscovery of knowledge held in earlier times. And in the West today, the main people that work with this knowledge are, of course, the dowsing organizations of different countries. There's major dowsing organizations in Canada and in the US and Britain, etc. One of the things that you can actually test without using dowsing devices to test the quality of the energy on a toxic earth energy grid, and without just observing the landscape and seeing where things are healthy and where they're not, is if you have a person be directly on one of these grids and you're testing their brainwave patterns, you will find a severe disruption of the person's brainwaves when they are sitting on a crossing of this grid. And that's what we show here. It's one of the ways the Germans were able to scientifically establish, yes, there is a disruption to the human energy field when you're exposed to these energetic grids. Now, from the Egyptian biogeometry perspective, they believe that we shouldn't try to block these detrimental grids because the grids aren't bad in and of themselves. They have become highly toxic due to their interaction with all of our electromagnetic technology and other things going on today. But the lines themselves are the Earth's own energy conduction system. They're part of the Earth's literal grid or net of energy and how it distributes energy and information throughout its entire energetic surface. So from the Egyptian perspective, they don't do some of the things that some of the dowsing organizations in Europe and North America do, which often have to do with trying to block the earth energy line or deflect it in a certain way. Instead, what they do is they work with the line to transmute the quality of energy on it, because all of these lines of energy work like carrier waves. That's why the Egyptians call it the spiritual carrier wave when they analyze the energy quality. So just as a radio wave can send any type of program or music that you want it to, if you tune to the different radio stations, they're carrier waves, and they could carry any music, any program, whether it's something highly disturbing or something quite beneficial. And the same thing is true for these earth energy lines. They're carrying a lot of detrimental energy information at the moment, but through particular methods, which in the biogeometry system have to do with working with particular geometry forms and shapes in many cases, which have the BG3 energy, we can transmute the quality of the energy on those lines. So whereas when we study a location, and we might see at that location that where these lines are crossing, what we classically find is that people will have cancer or other problems when they're sleeping with their bed over these places. And I've seen it so many times, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, that if a person's sleeping with the crossing beneath their ribs, they might get lung cancer. If it's sleeping with it over their kidneys, they get a kidney problem, et cetera, et cetera. The area you're sleeping over gets a problem because you're there repeatedly every night for 8 hours a day. And so you see also that the hedge this is a place where you see hedges don't grow normally, they're all brown. Are there places where there are lots of accidents on a road? Those accident sites are places of detrimental energy where people's brain waves get disturbed and a lot of crashes, things like this. So the Egyptian solution is to transmute the quality of energy on that grid so that instead of a grid of toxic energy where you go in and you're trying desperately to move your chair and your bed and everything off the grid, to transmute the grid to what they call a grid of gold. Because if you transmute it with the BG3, the highest energetic element in the BG3 is the higher harmonic of gold. And so instead of getting a toxic grid in most locations, you now have a literal grid of golden energy, which is highly beneficial and very much connected to this idea of sacred architecture and sacred design. Because it's not just to create a dwelling that's useful for human beings, but also to create a dwelling that is harmonious and beneficial to the earth itself. So following up on that basic concept, one of the things that really impressed me about one particular text dealing with a type of Taoist feng shui that I read is the person kept emphasizing the idea that in feng shui, it's not just about putting up little things in your house to try to balance the energy there. It's about being a doctor to the earth. And so that we have done so much to harm the Earth, there's a tremendous need today for us to be doctors to the Earth and to bring its energy quality up to the correct quality that it really needs today very, very badly. And so I really believe sacred geometry, biogeometry, and related disciplines are master keys to this. In fact, one of the reasons why Ibrahim Karim decided to give out biogeometry today is because he was so worried about the energetic effects of our electromagnetic technology. Because once you understand resonance and you test the energy quality of things, this detrimental energy quality I've been discussing, you not only find it off the toxic Earth energy lines and off electromagnetic circuits, if you test a person's energy field when they're in a very negative state of thought and emotion, it's full of the exact same energy quality. And if you test disease sites in a human body, they have the exact same energy quality. If you test connections to detrimental spiritual beings, they have the exact same energy quality. Everything is a resonant system. And so the more that we're beginning to flood things with these electromagnetic radiations, because one part of it has a detrimental component, it is having vibratory effects all through the resonant circuit that is quite detrimental. And so one of the solutions to this is simply to change the quality of the energy on the electromagnetic circuits. If people had known enough when we invented the electromagnetic technology in the first place, it could all have been done from the get-go, but it wasn't. It's like those of you that study frequency medicine. You know that one frequency can kill and another frequency can heal. You find the correct frequencies, you can get the correct effect. And so one of the things that the Egyptians with Dr. Karim have been doing is trying to find a way to help to transmute the grid over entire locations. And so recently, they've done projects in Switzerland to transmute the energy quality in entire cities of Switzerland. And so far, they've been able to transmute the electromagnetic grid in 2 entire Swiss cities, Hamburg and Hirschberg, Switzerland. And there are moves afoot to try to get them to do this for the entire country of Switzerland. But it's always a push-pull between the local people that want it and the federal government that has resistance to it for multiple reasons. 2 simple reasons. Number 1, you cannot show the difference in the energy quality with electromagnetic devices. They do not pick up the energy qualities. You can show it with biological markers by testing the changes in the health of the people, animals, plants of the location. But electromagnetic devices don't pick it up. The second reason is that to admit that it needs balancing in the first place is to admit that the energy is causing problems. And there has been huge initiatives for decades now by power companies, utilities, and the manufacturers of electromagnetic devices to tell people that there is no harm from our electromagnetic technology, that only if it's ionizing so strongly that you'll get a burn can it possibly harm you. But we have plenty of evidence to the contrary. But for those of you that are familiar with this field, you'll be familiar with people like Robert Becker, MD, who wrote the book The Body Electric, and has done a tremendous amount of investigation into how electromagnetic energies and frequencies affect the human energy body, where he talked about how dangerous these frequencies were. And he was warned not to speak to certain Senate hearings about this, but he did so anyway. And immediately upon speaking, he lost his positions at the hospital, he got blacklisted, all this sort of thing. So you speak out about it, it doesn't go well for you professionally. But we know that these emissions are harmful. So to admit that it needs correction in the first place is something that there's a lot of energy being put into resisting. You'll note that the thresholds of acceptable electromagnetic radiation are much lower in some countries than others. In Scandinavia, they're a fraction of what's allowed in most other countries of the world because they've actually looked at the studies and they know what harms the human physiology. So one thing that Ibrahim has been doing, in addition to this project to actually transmute entire areas and allowing us to teach people how to do the biogeometry system for themselves locally, is that they're also looking at how to broadcast electromagnetic circuits so that all the energy broadcast has this BG3 balancing energy quality. It has the exact same energy quality as a sacred power spot instead of the toxic earth lines. And they've managed to do entire radio and television broadcast that the energy of the broadcast has the BG3 energy instead of the normal detrimental energy. So a lot of possibilities in this area. We have the information, we have the capacity to do it now. So in other bodies of work, there have been It's amazing how many people in the world right now are getting activated to study aspects of this energetic puzzle. And so there's one particular document that I forget if it's in the handout you've gotten so far or the one that you're going to get tomorrow, but it's a kind of a outline of some of the different disciplines that would go into a modern earth healing master science and different bodies of research that could plug into it. But one of those I mentioned is the work of Phil Callahan. Those of you that know of Phil Callahan know that he is a person that does a lot of investigation into electromagnetic energies. And he is the person who's really pioneered the study of paramagnetism. And he has a book called Paramagnetics. We have a couple of his books in the other room. They're made available from a great organization called Acres USA, which is devoted to helping to heal the earth and do sustainable agriculture. And his work in paramagnetics shows the way that the earth is much healthier and crops grow much faster and healthier when there's a particular amount of paramagnetic minerals and stones with the earth. And from one of his books, I believe it's from Paramagnetism, he has this particular illustration. He started out in the military, I believe, in studying radar systems and working with radar. Then he got into studying insects and looking at the way that insect antennas function energetically, and then comparing that with the antenna systems that he learned in the military, and how nature and modern technology use these antenna systems to work with energetic circuits. And so in this book, he compares what he found in studying the antenna systems of insects to the way that, as he expresses it here, he says religious structures around the world function as dielectric waveguides like the insect sensors shown at the top. And so he shows the way that, for instance, in his work, that the great round towers of Ireland actually had an effect in creating fertility in the land, depending on the stone they were made of and their shape and their radiant length as an antenna. So another very important piece of the puzzle. There's a very interesting book that just came out, and I'm trying to remember the title of it. It's something like Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Wisdom. And in this book, which came out just very recently, it analyzes the way that the authors had found that if you put seeds before you plant them in particular locations, particular sacred sites in the world, that the seeds grow much faster and healthier. So this is a couple of illustrations from that book. This one here is where they went to what was known as the Lost World Pyramid at Tikal in Central America. It says it was the first stone structure built here and the first of the Mayan cities. And it links to the Mayans' predecessors, the Olmec. So they found that the energy, the way that the structure itself ties into the earth energy at that location, has a very strong beneficial charging action for the seeds that are held there. And that in fact there were classical traditions for people to bring their seeds to these places before they planted them. So it was something that was understood in the ancient world. Here inside of a Native American rock chamber, he describes in the book the way that when they took a photograph inside of it, they actually got this picture of an energetic sphere that was invisible to the naked eye. And they tested it, and in this book they described using all types of electronic sensors and things to pick up the different subtle electromagnetic variations. And they said the large stone roof slabs directly above it are highly magnetic. They left seeds of a particular type of corn in the chamber for 75 minutes. At the same place where they found this glowing ball of light on the picture. And they found that the seeds that were charged in that chamber for 75 minutes grew almost 100% faster than a control sample of the same set of seeds. And here's an illustration in their book. They said that when this corn was harvested, that had been charged in the chamber, the Native American chamber, that the bottom two rows were harvested from those that were charged, having been left inside the chamber for 75 minutes. And they compare that to the ones at the top. They said that the chamber seeds produced 3 times as much corn by weight as the controls. So again, this is a very interesting master science from ancient times that we can begin to reclaim. A tremendous amount of it, again, has to do with these matrices of energy and the way the buildings interact with the earth energy. Now the next topic I want to touch on as we move toward a close here is there's a concept of organic architecture. And I just want to make a couple of comments on this. Organic architecture is wonderful because what it does is it creates structures that are harmonious with the landscape. And instead of just having purely square or rectangular types of buildings, they have flowing surfaces and forms. Like you see with this particular example here, it's actually a country club in Hawaii. And so organic architecture fits in very well to the landscape. At the same time, one point that I've heard Dr. Karim with biogeometry make many times is that this doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that all squared and rectangular types of buildings must go. Because these types of buildings were developed in the first place because the Earth's own grid is squared and rectangular. And they built those structures on the grid. If you look at Vastu Vidya from India or Feng Shui from China, there's a classical teaching there that a square or rectangular building is fairly balanced and is good energetically. And so we don't want to throw that out, particularly if we understand that it's meant to be tied into the Earth grid in a beneficial way. So when we talk about organic architecture, people normally mean smooth flowing forms of the architecture. But what if we had a truly organic architecture that was based on actual plant forms? You know, the type of thing that you see in The Lord of the Rings with the hobbits, right? Well, there are people working on this right now. This is from a recent issue of Popular Science. And they've already developed the prototypes for this, and they're already growing these things. The basic idea is that the walls are these scaffold sections, and they use particular types of plants that will then grow along the scaffolding and over time create the walls out of biomass as a living, breathing structure. It's like living inside a plant. And they've figured out all these different aspects for how they're going to make this work. And they're already building and developing these things right now. So this is truly organic architecture and something that's starting to come down the pike. We also have the idea of using sacred geometry for building. This is an illustration I actually took out of an advertisement out of a scientific magazine where you can buy these geodesic dome type kits. I thought this was a really beautiful design. They did it in such a way that with the basic geodesics, they still had a very beautiful opening, and they then gave you this particular pentagonal form actually made out of triangles toward the top there. So by working with pure geometry, you can create all types of beneficial forms, and this connects back to the work of Buckminster Fuller, who developed the geodesic dome as a way to get the strongest possible structure with the minimum amount of material. Because with the geodesic dome, it works with the principle of the power of the triangle and the tetrahedron. And we'll talk about that more in coming days. But the triangle and tetrahedron are very strong natural energy systems. The tetrahedron is extremely resilient to pressure. So if you build something according to the tetrahedron, and that's related to the actual forms of geodesics, it is extremely strong structure using very little material. And I wanted to end with this particular note here, which has to do with another article that appeared recently in Popular Science. In fact, the magazine might still be on the stands. That was very exciting to me, because for years of my working in this area, and of working particularly with the Egyptians in biogeometry, there's been the idea of, well, how can we start actually building buildings that are more energetically beneficial, and developing various ideas about this. But what's happened now, that's just now coming to fruition, is that MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with some very heavy hitters in the construction and manufacturing realm, are now working together on a particular project that's called open source building. And this open source project is to be able to create modular components for buildings that are very, very high quality. So again, it's not to the quality of what we tend to call modular homes or mobile homes, but very high quality buildings. But all of the parts can be used to put together really like a set of Legos. And what he's doing here is he's got his basic plan, and now he's getting his prefab forms to then go along with the blueprint to put together the actual house. Because the basic idea is that it's extremely illogical and a huge waste of time, energy, and money the way we build houses currently. We don't build anything else the way that we build houses. And so if we do it according to putting the systems together so that they snap and connect together, we can create houses that are more beautiful, more energy efficient, and much more energetically balanced if it's done appropriately. They don't necessarily understand that part, but we can add it to it. and it would be much, much cheaper than what we're doing currently. And so this shows you right now they're already developing the sets for this. He says you can move all the pieces around like Legos. The system is infinitely variable. So what you have here is rather than you build the building, then you get the electrician in and he runs all the wiring inside of it, and then you get the guy come in to finish the walls and then do the drywall and everything else. It's all pre-finished, and all of the electricity is already inside of it. And it's got these connectors on the side where the connectors go one into the other. It's all already UL, United Laboratories certified and ready to go electrically and every other way when you put it together. So this opens up a lot of possibilities. This is just in the early stages, but again, there's some heavy hitters behind it. So this gives you an example of a house made to order, and it shows you the way that they're already designing these things so that all the pieces fit in to the overall structure. The bathroom with the bedroom, etc., and you can really put it together any way that you want. And basically the whole thing, the interior walls are fully assembled, everything, so it just snaps into place. It's very straightforward. And this is our last slide, which they've already built houses based on this with the prototypes. This is a house that's now functioning as a group residence for patients recovering from brain injuries. And they built this as their first prototype, and they built it in less than a month, and they said that the waste from it fit into just 2 trash cans, as opposed to the great dumpsters of waste that we normally get. Now the thing about this is if they're ready to actually move in this direction with manufacturing, and I'll take the lights back on now, please, then what we can do is if we understand some of these principles that we've just gone over with the masters of the compass, and the other things that we've talked about this weekend, with the biogeometry and the various energy studies available to us now, we can apply sacred geometry, apply biogeometry, and apply this other information so that all of these structures will already be energy balanced. When people come to the biogeometry course and they learn how to energy balance, most of the stuff that we learned there we wouldn't even have to do because the house would already be energy balanced to begin with. And then we could start putting our energy toward actually using this to heal the earth itself. And in fact, if the building was correctly constructed, all the earth energy lines in and around it would already be corrected according to the design of the building. All this is possible now, and if we can get this put into a standardized system, so people just fit it together like Legos, that's what we're going to need to do. Most people aren't going to take the time to come to a course in sacred geometry and figure out the dynamics. But if you get it prefab, then we really have a huge possibility here for creating something really good. And so that's my final comment related to the Masters of the Compass and sacred design. So that's the end for today.